Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Ride with the Devil by Joanna Blake, narrated by Troy Duran and Kendall Taylor. Prologue. Jack. Jack watched as brother after brother disappeared into the back with the sweet butts. Everyone was so focused on getting ass they didn't pay attention to what really mattered: staying alive. The club wasn't just about getting wasted and getting tail. It meant something. They were supposed to be a well-oiled machine, an army. But this was just sloppy. He shook his head. He didn't have the patience for dealing with women, not when he had bigger fish to fry. It had been a while since he had laid anyone, though. He hadn't had the urge. Some people might say he didn't have any urges at all. He knew he could have his pick of the women hanging around the bar tonight. Hell, a couple of them would have done anything to get a couple of minutes with his cock. He had gotten a reputation for being unnaturally large, not from any locker room talk either. It was just visible through his pants. It was kind of hard to hide something the size of a tree trunk. It was true that he was big, but also a pain in the ass. Could he help it that he was 6'4" with a cock to match? It didn't mean he was offering rides. In fact, he was way too popular for his liking. Something about the way he kept to himself only seemed to make the girls more desperate to get his attention. They made it clear they'd do anything to please him. He sneered at a girl with frizzy, bleached-out hair who brushed past him with a simper. Maybe it was time to head home. He stalked over to the bar and put down a heavy mug that Donnie kept just for him. "Want a refill?" Jack shook his head. He'd been drinking ginger ale all night, as usual. "Calling it a night?" "Yeah." Donnie smiled at him. Jack didn't smile back. It wasn't that he didn't like Donnie. It was just that Jack never smiled. Donnie held out his hand, and Jack clasped it in a show of brotherhood. "See you tomorrow, Viking." Jack nodded and left. He ignored the looks he was getting from the rest of the club and the easy women who were lounging everywhere. He was not in the mood for dealing with them, even just for some head. He strode out to his bike and climbed on. It was just a quick ride to his shop and the apartment above it. It was late, but he wasn't sleepy. He decided to throw the lights on upstairs and work on the roof deck. Jack was hammering in 2x4 planks of cedar when he looked up at the sky. It was already getting light out, but he could still see the stars. It was beautiful up here. Or it would be when he was finished. He wondered briefly who the hell he was building this for. It's not like he had anyone to share it with, other than Dev and Donnie. Hell, he hardly even talked to them, even though he saw them every day. He would lay down his life for them in a heartbeat. Not that it was saying much. He knew his life wasn't worth much to anyone, anyway. He'd known that since he was 5 years old.
Chapter 1. Janet. Janet stared at her shoes while her father droned on and on about responsibility. She did her best to tune him out completely. It wasn't like she hadn't heard it all before. Over and over again. She was mentally running her routine, the last part she'd played in the Seattle Ballet Company. In her mind, she marked out all her steps, swooping with the music. It was almost like she was back there, dancing her heart out. Even though it had been well over a year ago. It almost worked, too. And then her mother took over the lecture, making sure Janet knew how humiliated she was to have a daughter like her. Ouch, that was a new one. Janet tuned her out, too. It was better this way. Don't try and make them see reason. That had never gotten her far. Just let them have their say and she could get on with her life, whatever that was going to turn out to be. She bit her tongue to keep from talking back. They just didn't get her. They never had, and she doubted they ever would. They had expectations about the way a proper young lady should sit and talk and behave. Ideas that seemed straight out of the 1950s, if you asked Janet. Her parents were extremely well off and belonged to every club in town, They had the nicest house in the neighborhood, the nicest cars. And until recently, the nicest little goody two-shoes professional ballet dancer for a daughter. She almost laughed, but she didn't want to get them going again. She had been a goody two-shoes. Until about a year ago. Then, bam! Now, not so much. Janet had never been the sort of person who did well with a bunch of rules. Dancing was different. She was okay with coloring in the lines for the sake of her art. But other than that, she was always a little bit of a rebel. She didn't care about what other people thought, not like her parents did. But she didn't want to fight. Not tonight. Tonight she was meeting her best friend. She was finally seeing Kaylee for the first time in 6 months, since she'd left for college. That had gone really well. College had not been for her, to put it mildly. She missed dancing too much. After the accident, nothing could quite get through to her. She hadn't enjoyed her classes, the dorms, or anything really. Well, except for one thing. She rolled her eyes and forced herself to keep still. She was ready to bounce out of her chair with excitement, not just because she was going to see Kaylee, but because of where they were meeting. They were going there. The SOS Clubhouse. Janet had never been inside the Spawn's headquarters. Few outsiders had. And tonight was her chance. Her best friend was dating the president of one of the most notorious MC clubs in all of California. She was bursting with anticipation. She wondered if there would be anyone there she might want to date, too. Kaylee had warned her that most of the guys were pretty cavalier about women, but you never know. Besides, Janet decided that she could be cavalier, too. She'd been feeling particularly reckless since getting kicked out of college for poor grades. She'd spent a semester and a half on academic probation, struggling since almost the first week of school. She didn't really blame her parents for being mad about that. But how could they understand what it was like? There was no way to explain it to them. College had changed everything for her. Once she wasn't dancing 7 hours a day. Her curves had blossomed. After years, she was finally a woman. She'd always been distracted by boys. Kaylee teased her about it endlessly. But after all this time, she distracted them, too. How was she supposed to concentrate on school with so many other things to do? She just wanted to dance and have fun. She'd gotten into the habit of hitting the nightclubs almost every damn night. Of course she was flunking out. She peeked up at her parents' sour expression. It was painfully obvious that they were still disappointed that her ballet career had been cut short. It didn't seem fair. She was the one who'd worked so hard for all those years. And besides, it's not like they had been expecting her to go to med school. No, they expected her to rub shoulders with the rich art world, get married as quickly as possible, and start popping out future rich people of America. Janet hadn't thought much past her next pair of tights, but she had been hoping, in a vague way, to become a physical therapist someday. It was the last thing anyone expected from her, but it was true. She'd fallen in love with the profession after the injury that forced her to hang up her toe shoes for good. Her physical therapist, Becky, had been amazing and so smart. It was around that point that she'd started to fill in and finally develop, after years and years of waiting, actual boobs. God, she loved her boobs. She loved the way they looked, the way they felt, and especially the way they seemed to open doors, get her out of speeding tickets, even get her free drinks. Lots and lots of free drinks. She tugged her skirt down over the tiny heart tattoo on her outer thigh. It was a good thing they hadn't seen that yet. No reason to send them into the stratosphere. Especially since that wasn't the last tattoo she planned on getting. After another 20 minutes of lecturing, they finally seemed to lose steam. Janet had heard enough about responsibility and becoming a productive member of society for a lifetime. She wasn't sure how she was going to fit into this world just yet, but she was sure it wasn't going to be the way her parents were talking about. Not even close.
Chapter 2. Jack. Jack stood watching while Donnie kept everyone in stitches. Donnie was practically sitting on the bar while he told the guys a hilarious story about Dev and Kaylee. He grunted at the punchline, as amused as everyone else. Jack never spoke, and Donnie loved to gab. The SOS's third in command could charm a snake out of its skin. Jack didn't mind, though. He actually liked listening to Donnie talk. It was a good thing, too. Donnie's story escalated, painting a picture of Devlin as a marked man, doomed for a lifetime of serving his tiny young old lady. Making fun of the club president's sudden and utter devotion to a mere slip of a girl was everyone's favorite pastime. The Spawns all adored Kaylee, too, so it was never mean-spirited. But it was funny, even to Jack. Especially to Jack. He didn't believe in love, but Devlin might change his mind. The formerly gruff club president. It was just too funny to see Devlin mooning over a woman when he'd had the chance to bed nearly every woman in 2 counties. You would think that would jade a man, make him bored or cynical. Jack knew better, though. As his second in command, he knew that Dev had been needing something more than that. He had for a long time. After Dev lost his family, the club was all he had. Dev's dad was the former club president, so he wasn't hazed or ever a probationary member. But he was young, alone, and just getting his legs on the road. At 28, Jack was a couple of years older and had taken him under his wing. He'd never told the boy what to do, but he'd shown him by example. The kid had good instincts from the start. He was strong and smart and fearless, sure, but it was his backbone and sense of fair play that Jack had known would make him into an incredible leader one day. And he'd been right. Donnie was mimicking Kaylee, accepting a larger-than-life bouquet of pink roses, pretending to struggle under the weight as he simpered in a high-pitched voice. A voice which sounded nothing like Kaylee to Jack. He rolled his eyes. And then she squeals, "Oh, Dev, for me?" Everyone laughed except Jack. They'd been there. Donnie had it wrong. The bouquet had been at least twice that size. "Speak of the devil." Devlin eyed them warily as he came into the bar. He took the ribbing the way it was intended, with a wink and a smile. He was smitten, though. If Kaylee wasn't such a good person, Jack might have been worried about him. Dev was wearing a clean and pressed shirt. That meant only one thing. Kaylee was coming to the clubhouse tonight. That meant everyone had better be on their best behavior, or else. Jack would make sure of it. Jack sipped his ginger ale and scoped the bar out for troublemakers. There were always short fuses around to diffuse in the SOS bar room. It was only an urgent matter when Dev's old lady was in the clubhouse, though. Usually, the Spawn let their guys work things out the old-fashioned way. But not when Kaylee was there. Dev was really strict about what was said and done around her. Some saw it as a sign of weakness, but not Jack. He knew Dev was a lucky son of a bitch to have found somebody who deserved that level of care and protection. Someone who loved him back. If anything, Jack was jealous. Not that he'd ever expected or even wished for anything like that for himself. He had been born without love, raised without it, and he expected to die without it too. Dogs like him didn't deserve love. He did deserve dignity and brotherhood from the other Spawns, but only through the dint of his unwavering loyalty. Other than that, he considered himself to be worthless. Well, except in a fight. Then he came in real fucking handy. Jack stood well over 6 feet tall and was built like a freight train, with broad shoulders and a massive, heavily muscled chest over narrow waist and hips. He was in peak physical condition. He'd lost the last of his extra padding in the last few years when he'd finally stopped drinking himself into oblivion every night. With his tattoos, muscular physique, and streaming long dark hair, he'd earned himself a slew of embarrassing nicknames over the years. Unfortunately, there was one that stuck. The Viking. He never responded to the joking around with more than a level stare. The joking usually stopped immediately. He didn't like to be teased or taken less than seriously, but he put up with it because he liked being in the thick of it with his fellow spawn. His life had been so desolate before he'd been initiated. He'd ridden alone for years, hitting the road when he was just 15 on the back of a stolen bike. He was still isolated in a lot of ways, but at least he wasn't alone. For the first time in his life, he knew there'd be someone to cry at his funeral. His brothers.
Chapter 3. Janet. Here we go. Janet exhaled and forced herself to relax as she followed Kaylee into the clubhouse. Years of dance training had given her a rail-straight spine. She reminded herself to slouch a little and to keep her stride short. Sometimes people thought she was stuck up because of her posture. She wasn't a snot, though she certainly wasn't a shrinking violet. She relaxed her body, letting it sway naturally, sinking into her hips when she walked. Do not walk like a freaking ballet dancer. She stared around the clubhouse as Kaylee led her to the barroom. The place was bigger than she'd thought. Not that she'd ever seen past the 12-foot chain-link fence that surrounded the compound before. You needed an invite to get in, and the club wasn't in the habit of inviting in high school girls, as far as she knew anyway. She tried not to look wide-eyed, but damn! It was literally as if the most badass honky-tonk bar had been plopped down in the middle of the huge building, far from prying eyes. There was a long, dark wood bar with a brass railing, fully stocked, 2 stripper poles on either end of the room, and chairs and tables everywhere. And men. Lots and lots of men. They all turned to look at them when they walked in. Every single guy in the joint gave her the look over. Janet looked around and saw a few seriously underdressed women here and there. She smiled to herself. Her miniskirt and tank top were practically modest. Not as modest as Kaylee's outfit, but close. Devlin made a beeline for them, kissing Kaylee quickly before holding out his hand in greeting. God, he was cute. Janet couldn't help but be a little envious of the adoring way he was staring at her friend. There was no doubt in her mind that he loved Kaylee. Of course, it was kind of hard not to love Kaylee. Janet had adored her since they were little girls playing in the sandbox together. Didn't matter that Janet's family was wealthy, or that Kaylee and her single mom lived in a less desirable part of town. It had been friendship at first sight. Nothing, and no one, had been able to keep them apart since. Well, other than the whole leaving town to pursue a classical dance career part. She sighed dreamily, wondering if anyone would ever look at her the way Devlin looked at her friend. The crowds parted as he led them over to the bar. Without a word, a few guys got up to vacate stools for them. She and Kaylee hopped onto the stools as a handsome guy with spiky black hair and bright blue eyes came over to take their orders. You must be Janet. I've heard a lot about you. I'm Donahue. Janet blushed a little bit. What had Kaylee said about her to these guys, and why would a tough-as-nails biker give a shit? From what she could see, they used up women like tissue paper. But Kaylee was in a protected class, and because of that, Janet was too. It wasn't just that she was the MC's president old lady. It's because they cared about Kaylee, Janet realized. Kaylee was one of them now. Janet had never belonged to any group. Even as a dancer, it had been a mostly solitary occupation. Her abilities growing up had set her so far above the rest of the local talent that no one had really talked to her, except her teacher, Mrs. Lewis, who adored her. And other dancers in the company had seen her as a threat. Until the accident. Now she was just plain old Janet Mahoney. Thanks. It's nice to meet you too. What can I get you lovely ladies this evening? She glanced at Kaylee, who smiled conspiratorially and leaned forward. 2 sea breezes, please. Donnie rolled his eyes at the girly order, making them giggle. There were 2 other guys behind the bar running around and doing the grunt work, but Donnie made their drinks, even adding fresh fruit. They turned around on their bar stools to include Devlin. He waved to a man across the room, and he started over. Janet's heart did a little flip-flop at the sight of him. Now there was a biker. Tall and lean and mean-looking. He had long dark hair and was dressed in leather pants and a club jacket with a black t-shirt underneath. His worn-in jeans hugged thighs as thick as tree trunks, and his calves were so big they filled out his jeans. His feet were big, too. She shivered as he got closer, and she saw his eyes. No man should have eyes that beautiful, not in a face made out of granite. And they were dark, so deep and secret that they looked black. His lips were full and sensual, even though he looked like he hadn't smiled in a century. He didn't look to the left or the right as he walked toward them. It was kind of like she was staring at the Terminator, but a really sexy one. She realized she was gripping her drink too hard and relaxed her hand. "This is Jack, my second in command. Jack, this is Janet." Her mouth felt dry as the giant turned his attention toward her. She held her breath as she waited for their eyes to meet. His eyes flicked over her as if she were inconsequential. But then, he paused as their gazes locked. There was a glimmer of something warm in his eyes, hot even. She felt it down to her toes. Other places, too. Forget that he was an outlaw biker. Eyelashes like that on a man should be criminal. He jerked his eyes away, and that was it. Whatever electric current she'd felt leap between them was gone. He nodded at her, and then at Kaylee. And then he turned around and stalked back to the spot he'd been occupying across the room. He hadn't said even one word. Janet's mouth must have been open as she stared at him. Jesus, he was a little bit scary. Kaylee giggled and sipped the fresh drink that Donnie had just placed in front of her. "Don't mind Jack. He's not as mean as he looks." "He isn't?" Devlin grinned and grabbed the beer Donnie served him without asking. "Jack's one of the best people I know. He just doesn't like to brag about it," he grinned. "Or anything, really." Janet glanced over her shoulder. She could have sworn Jack was scowling at her. But he turned his gaze so sharply that she couldn't be sure. His name was Jack, and he was beautiful in an utterly terrifying way, kind of like a Bond villain or a supervillain in a cartoon. And oh, so manly. She sighed and sipped her drink. She knew what she would be dreaming about that night.
Chapter 4. Jack. He stood by the door, letting his gaze soften as he took in everything at once. One thing kept catching his eye, though, no matter how hard he tried not to stare. Her. Shiny and bright as a new penny. Not just her hair, either. With her long legs and stunning face, she was physically stunning. But it was more than that. The damn girl sparkled with zest and curiosity. She shouldn't be here. Not even with Kaylee. There was something about Janet. She didn't seem like stuff would just roll off her the way some people did. She seemed like she would absorb it. Every bit. And this kind of place was the wrong thing for a shiny penny like her to absorb. She was too good for guys like him to even look at her. "Do me a favor, man?" He nodded. Dev knew he would do anything for him, or the club, but especially Dev and Donnie. "My old lady is here tonight. We got to keep things extra chill. Jack grunted in agreement. He liked Dev's new woman. First woman, really. Dev had never been serious about a female in his life. You would think it would soften him, but instead it made him harder, more ferocious. Well, other than the flowers and chocolates he brought her. He'd gotten her a leather jacket and a helmet, too, gloves for riding, and a pair of motorcycle boots. She was his old lady, there was no doubt about that. Oh, and her friend, too. Kaylee said she's a good girl, so keep the dogs away. Jack's eyes darted to the girl. He'd noticed her all right. It was impossible not to. His cock was paying attention, throbbing in his jeans just from looking at her. It had been a long damn time since he'd gotten hard without meaning to. And if she could do that to him, he knew the room was full of boners. Keeping guys away from her was going to be next to impossible. Those legs alone could start a riot. Never mind the silky red hair that made his fingers itch to grab it and wrap it around his rough and calloused hands. He'd use it to tilt her head back so he could ravage her mouth with his. She's had a hard time. She's under the club's protection now, too. Jack raised an eyebrow. Red. Dev laughed and slapped Jack's shoulder. I know, man, like waving a red flag at a bull, but I know you're up to the challenge. Jack just crossed his arms and stared straight ahead, going back to seeing everything and nothing at once. People thought he was stoic, a giant piece of rock, but it wasn't true. He knew he could bleed. He knew it better than most. He knew he had to be vigilant, stay on his guard, be ready to fight to protect himself and anyone he cared about. He had learned that early.
Chapter 5. Janet. What's he doing over there? 3 drinks later, and Janet could not get the guy out of her mind. He'd been standing alone all night, surveying the room. He had literally not moved in hours. He's protecting us. What? Kaylee leaned in. It can get kind of crazy in here. Jack's making sure nothing gets started while we are here. Oh. A funny feeling was settling in the pit of her stomach. He was protecting them. She felt safe suddenly. Safer than she had in a long time. Maybe ever. Kaylee was giggling. She didn't drink too often. Janet was feeling a bit giddy herself. They call him the Viking, but don't do it. He hates it. She took another sip, staring at Jack from under her hair. Does he ever talk? No, to Devlin sometimes, but I've barely heard more than 3 words out of him at a time. Is something wrong with him? No. And don't let anyone hear you say that. Devlin told me he owes Jack his life. He's done more for Devlin than anyone. Me too. He's a good guy. You don't have to be scared of him, I promise. Janet nodded. She was feeling something, all right. But it wasn't fear. The hairs rose on the back of her neck. She turned and caught him staring at her. No, not staring. His eyes were boring into her. She could feel his eyes as if he were touching her. Intimately. The Viking. It suited him. She swallowed nervously and turned back toward the bar. She glanced over her shoulder, and he was still watching her with a faint, superior smile. She doubted anyone could see that smile but her. It was barely there, in the very corner of his eyes and mouth. Her spine stiffened, and she turned her back on him deliberately. There was something about him that made her nervous. He was so male. She'd never seen anyone that masculine in her life. He was like a lion or a gorilla at the zoo. He looked cold and hard, no matter how handsome or chiseled his face was. And that body, Jesus, he did look like a Viking. Strong, lean, and ruthless. He made her nervous, very, very nervous. Kaylee was chatting about some of the people they'd gone to high school with. As Janet struggled vainly to get her emotions in check, the drinks weren't helping. Yes, she was nervous, but she was also aroused. She crossed her legs and pulled her top up in the front. When she snuck a look behind her, Jack was openly leering at her. No, not at her. At her legs. She felt overly warm in the bar suddenly, as if they'd turned up the heat like the sauna at the dance studio where she practiced sometimes. Not that she danced anymore. It was painful to even think about. She'd lost everything when she injured herself. Her hopes and dreams. But she'd also been freed of the relentless pressure. Freed from the expectations of her dance company, the press, her parents, and herself. Especially her parents. She licked her lips and nodded when Donnie offered her another drink. He was lording it up all night, bossing the prospects around. His merry blue eyes made her feel comfortable. Jack's black gaze did not. Devlin slid his arm around Kaylee. "You about ready to go?" She nodded, a light blush tinting her cheeks. Janet looked away, not wanting to interrupt their intimate moment. Kaylee had said that Devlin was always trying to get her alone. She'd said that he was insatiable. Janet had begged for details, but Kaylee refused to say much. It was obvious that whatever Devlin wanted to do when he got Kaylee alone was more than a little bit naughty. It was also clear that her friend didn't mind a bit. "Come on, Janet, I'll drive you home." She waved goodbye to Donnie as Dev threw a couple of 20s on the bar. He didn't have to pay for drinks in his own place. It was just a courtesy for Donnie and the other bartenders. Janet couldn't resist one more glance across the room while Kaylee pulled her jacket on and gathered her purse. Jack was just where he'd been all night. He was staring toward them again. He could have been looking at any of them, Kaylee, Dev, even Donnie behind the bar. But she knew he wasn't. He was looking at her.
Chapter 6. Jack. "Ready to do a run-by?" Jack grunted in agreement. It was late, and the scene at the bar was still going, but they were gone, so he could leave. She was gone. He hadn't stopped thinking about her since she walked out the door. There were 50 reasons he could not pursue the girl, no matter what his dick was saying. As they pulled out onto the road, he reminded himself of them, starting at the top. 1. She was a good girl. Classy. She would never go for a dirtbag biker. 2. He didn't need anyone. He just wanted her for some godforsaken reason. 3. Even though she was friends with Kaylee, who was a sweetheart, he had a feeling Janet was another type of girl altogether. Those flashing eyes screamed high maintenance. 4. She wasn't short, but she was still tiny compared to him. He might break her. 5. She was a rich girl, a normal on steroids, the kind of person he sneered at. 6. She would want things if he fucked her. And since he didn't just want to fuck her once, he would have to give those things to her, and he couldn't. 7. She probably wouldn't fuck him anyway. 8. But maybe he could try. Make an effort. It would be worth it for just one touch of that silky skin. 9. He didn't do sweet butts or regular girls. He didn't do women for the most part. Not for a very long time. 10. He didn't like messy. Janet was messy. A hot mess, literally. He could go on and on. It was a fruitless exercise. Jack knew he might not ever see her again anyway. He'd certainly never dare to touch her. But he could think about it, indulge the fantasy. He had a feeling he couldn't stop if he wanted to. They pulled to the outskirts of town and killed their lights. It was a rundown part of the suburban sprawl, an area that used to be nice but wasn't anymore. A part of town that time had passed over. They watched the house for an hour, staring at the crappy split level that one officer Grant had called home. He'd been warned that he was on parole with the club. They were probably going to hurt him at some point, but for now, they were just looking for an excuse. He'd stayed the hell away from Kaylee and the club, not even daring to get takeout from Maze since everything went down. The man looked scared, which was what Dev wanted, what they all wanted. It was better if he suffered, mentally torturing himself. It was better than killing him, or just messing him up. All three options were still on the table, but for now the order was to keep tabs. So they did. But tonight, something new was going on. Grant had company. A woman's voice was raised over the sound of classic rock. Not the good stuff, though. The soft stuff. Rock ballads that chicks liked. Jack sneered. A blonde threw open a window, then turned to throw a beer can across the room. Donnie and Jack exchanged a glance. Fucking Danny. Well, holy shit. Jack grunted in agreement. Come on, we got to update Dev. They should be home from dropping Kaylee off. That was funny. It took Dev 3 hours to drop Kaylee off. He never wanted the girl out of his sight. Plus, Jack knew that Dev was trying to find creative ways and places to screw the living hell out of his woman. He smirked. Dev had it bad. Jack would never let that happen to him. He'd never beg for a woman, no matter how irresistible she was.
Chapter 7. Janet. Janet moaned, rolling over in bed. Her head hurt. Those sea breezes had punched more of a wallop than she'd imagined. She stared at the clock by her bedside table. The minute hand clicked over to 7 a.m. What the hell was she doing up at 7 a.m.? Bang, 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 bang. Somebody was knocking on her door. No, knocking was too polite a word. They were pounding, like her head. Oh, God, come in. Janet, open the door this instant. She shut her eyes tightly. She must have thrown the latch last night in her inebriated state. She'd been in another world last night when she got home, thinking about him. She tossed and turned half the night, feeling his eyes on her even hours later. Did he like her, want her? Or was he judging her and finding her lacking? She must seem like a silly girl to a hard man like him. Then again, he was loyal to Kaylee and they were the same age. But she was a very different person than her quiet friend. All she knew was she cared what he thought of her after meeting him once. Jack, the Viking. Ugh, who knew men could be so confusing? In college, it had been straightforward and obvious if a boy liked you or not. Now she was all hot and bothered by a man who may or may not even know she existed. Bang, 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 bang. I'm coming, Jesus! She rolled to her feet and tentatively walked toward the door. She felt a bit off kilter but found her sea legs quickly. She almost giggled. Being hungover was a lot like being on a swaying boat. She knew because her ballet company had thrown its annual fundraiser on a boat one year. A booze cruise. That, of course, the underage dancers were forbidden from partaking in. She unlocked the door and opened it to see her mother standing in the hallway with a sour expression on her face, as usual. Janet, if you are going to live in this house, then I expect you to be up at 7 o'clock. Okay, Mom. And I expect you to be a productive member of this household, if not society. Janet didn't say anything. She was standing there in her panties and a camisole looking at her mother's face. There was no love there. Just regret. Her mother had never wanted children. She'd never said so, but Janet had overheard her yelling at her father late one night. Everything that had gone wrong in her life was all his fault, and Janet's, just for existing. If you aren't going to work, you will be doing chores. I made a list. It's in the kitchen. You can start there." Her mother turned and abruptly walked away. Janet eyed her bed longingly, then sighed and pulled on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt. She just knew her mother was going to make her life a living hell until she got a job. But who was going to hire her? An ex-dancer/college dropout with 0 experience under her belt? It wasn't going to be easy, that was for sure. She considered asking Kaylee if May needed anyone at the diner, but she was almost afraid to. What if she was a terrible waitress? What she really needed was to get out of this house. She felt like she was suffocating here after only a few weeks. It wasn't just leftover teenage angst. She wasn't wanted here. Her parents didn't really care about her. They just cared what the neighbors thought. By 10 o'clock, Janet had swept, mopped, and vacuumed the house. By noon, she had raked and weeded under the rose bushes. Her mother had hovered over her almost constantly, riding her without mercy. Janet's resentment had grown to a boiling point around 3 p.m., but since her mother had conveniently disappeared around that time, a patch of weeds had gotten the brunt of it. Now she was just exhausted. She crawled into bed, still in her work clothes. Her phone buzzed. It was Kaylee. "Mall tomorrow?" Janet grinned sleepily and quickly tapped back, "Yes, what time?" She could hang with Kaylee and look for jobs. "2-ish? We'll pick you up. Perfect." Janet rolled onto her back. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. She knew if she stayed in her bedroom, her mother would tell her she was being lazy. So she pulled on her jogging shorts and laced up her sneakers. As predicted, her mother tried to stop her before she even got close to the front door. "Where are you going?" "For a run. You don't want me getting soft, do you?" She grinned at her mother's face and popped in her headphones, turning the music to full blast. And just like that, she was free.
Chapter 8. Jack. He held perfectly still as people walked past him, most giving him a wide berth. A little girl stared up at him in awe. He gave her a nod. Kids were funny. The adults were afraid of him, but kids never were. He would end up with someone in his lap if he sat down long enough at one of the club's family events. Part of the reason he preferred to stand. Jack was waiting outside the south entrance of the mall, leaning on his bike. He didn't usually go to places like this. The smell of plastic and perfume made him uncomfortable, as did all the normal people. The spawns weren't normal. They were the 1%, above and apart from the throngs of average people, separate and proud of it. Jack did his best never to mix with the regular folks. He hardly mixed with anyone. But Dev had asked him to, and Jack always did what Dev said. Plus, he'd get to see her again. He nodded unenthusiastically when Dev asked him if he was free to go to the mall. The freaking mall. But then Dev had mentioned that Kaylee's hot little friend Janet was going. Hot was the wrong word. The girl was scorching. He'd been thinking about her for 2 days now. That body, the red hair, those remarkable aqua eyes, those pouty cherry lips that begged for his mouth and tongue. The girl was off the charts gorgeous, and that was just her looks. Her spicy personality only added fuel to the fire. The list of reasons he'd made to forget her had done nothing to cool his lust. If anything, it made him more obsessed. And hard. Painfully hard. Jesus, he hadn't had this many boners since he was 15. He didn't like it. It was disconcerting for someone like him who'd like to be in control. He scowled and adjusted his package and his jeans. It was already throbbing, just thinking about her. Down boy. It wouldn't do to walk around the mall with a stiffy. He almost smiled. Actually, that wasn't a bad idea. What would the normals say about that? Devlin's SUV turned into the parking lot, and Jack stood up. Then he leaned back on his bike again. He didn't know what to do with himself. What the hell was wrong with him? Devlin parked, and Jack watched as the girls climbed out. First Kaylee, her golden brown hair shining in the sun. A long, pale leg stepped out of the back seat, and then another. His gut tightened when he saw what she was wearing. Janet was wearing shorts today. Tight little denim shorts that hugged her hips and ass. And Jesus, what an ass. Round and curvy and just begging for a man's hands to grip it. A man could do a lot with something that juicy to hold on to. She was leaning back into the SUV to grab something. Her bag. He swallowed as her sweet little bottom was thrust even more prominently into view. Fuck. Now he was really getting hard. He looked away and forced himself to think about something distasteful. His childhood. Basically any moment from the age of 3 to 14 would do. Before he'd been big enough to fight. It worked. His body calmed down and he exhaled in relief. He raised his eyes again just as they came toward him. Keep it together, Jack. Don't forget. She's not for you.
Chapter 9. Janet. Janet felt her heart leap in her chest at the sight of him. He was here. The Viking. He was looking at her with a slight scowl, as if he'd just tasted something bitter, like biting into a lemon. Well, there goes his theory that he liked her. Nope, not even a little. He certainly didn't look like he'd been thinking about her the way she'd been thinking about him for the past 2 days. She wished she'd known he was going to be there. She would have taken more time with her hair, her makeup, her outfit. Then again, he was looking at her. As they got closer, she could see that he was staring at her legs again. No, higher, he was staring at her, right between her legs. He looked hungry. She almost fell over in shock. Maybe she hadn't been wrong after all. "Hey, man." Jack nodded in greeting, but he didn't move his eyes from her body. They slid up slowly, inspecting her. She felt her legs getting rubbery as his gaze flicked over her breasts and finally lifted to her face. She licked her lips nervously, and his scowl increased. What was going on with this guy? Heat pooled in her belly. Just by looking at her, he turned her to putty. He'd done more to her than any man alive, just with his eyes. Not that he appeared to care one way or the other. She literally could not figure out if he liked her or hated her. Or maybe it was a little bit of both. She decided that it would be better to ignore him completely. Act like she wasn't melting into a puddle of swooning goo every time he glanced in her direction. Just pretend he isn't getting to you. It will salvage your pride and maybe, just maybe, it will make him crazy for you. Decision made, she tossed her hair and walked into the mall. Come on, Kaylee. Don't forget to keep an eye out for any help wanted signs. She could have sworn the scowl on his face got even deeper when she walked past him. She didn't even glance back to see Kaylee and the guys follow her into the mall. Scowl all you want, big boy.
Chapter 10. Jack. This was hell. He was at the mall, and this was actual hell. As a Devil's Rider, he should feel right at home, but he didn't. He shifted his weight, trying to will his heart-on away. He had a perma-boner, thanks to her. Jack stood outside the store as Kaylee and Janet tried on clothes. They'd been inside, standing with Dev, until Janet had tried on a slinky red dress that molded to her curves. He'd felt like he'd been kicked in the stomach. She looked ridiculously sexy, like a dancer on one of those stupid TV shows. It was way too provocative. He wanted to rip it off of her. He could picture the torn dress in his hands as she stood naked in front of him. He wanted it, that crumpled, torn scrap of fabric in his hands. He'd never wanted anything so badly in his life. Arousal had come crashing through him. He couldn't figure out why. Not only was she obviously a spoiled little headstrong brat, but the rich daddy's girl was going out of her way to ignore him. Unless, did that mean she liked him? Girls did stuff like that all the time, from what he'd heard. He moaned. The last thing he needed was some little stuck-up girl messing with his peace of mind. Best to ignore her. She'd go away eventually. They always did. Unless one of the other guys claimed her for themselves. He frowned, not liking that idea. He did not like it at all. In fact, he hated it. But that's what would happen if she kept hanging around the club. He was sure of it. He'd already heard some of the other spawns talking about that hot little redhead piece. Being a friend of Dev's old lady made her off limits for the rough stuff, but plenty of guys would be happy to call her their woman. Claim her. Make her an old lady for good. Not Jack, of course. He didn't want anything permanent, especially not with her. But the thought of her with another man irked him for some reason. Maybe he could discourage her from coming around. That would solve the problem. If he didn't have to see it, he didn't have to deal with it. Out of sight, out of mind. They came out of the store, Kaylee swinging a bag in her hand. Janet's hands were empty. That meant she hadn't bought that skimpy piece of fabric they were calling a dress. Good. He didn't think he could handle seeing her walk around in it. She'd liked it, though. Why hadn't the girl bought herself a dress? That's what girls did, wasn't it? Especially spoiled little rich girls like her. Daddy's girls who were too good for the likes of him. He followed them to the next store, deep in thought.
Chapter 11. Janet. Janet had been scanning the mall for help wanted signs since she walked in. It was a shame her parents had cut her off when she dropped out of school. That red dress had been really cute on her. She grinned to herself. Jack had certainly thought so. The big man thought he was being subtle, but she'd caught him staring at her almost constantly. His eyes had nearly bugged out of his head when he saw her in the tight little number. Maybe he did like her, but he had a stomachache? That's probably what it was. She smiled deviously as she imagined handing him a bottle of antacid and a tablespoon. "Look, Jan, there's a help wanted sign." Kaylee was pointing to one of the restaurants in the food court. Janet almost rolled her eyes. Great, Mommy and Daddy would just love that. It was one of those restaurants where the girls had to wear skimpy outfits while they waited tables. She was definitely not into doing that. That's until she caught the look on Jack's face. He disapproved, clearly. He probably thought a girl like her wasn't good enough to be friends with Kaylee. She squared her shoulders and smiled at her friend. Perfect. Jack's scowl seemed to get even deeper, if that was possible. She smiled and strode across the food court. Time to call his bluff, and maybe get a job in the meantime. A job that would make her parents see red. But anything was preferable to staying under their thumbs.
Chapter 12. Jack. He thought he was in hell already. He'd been wrong. Jack stared as Janet filled out the application. She was going to get hired, that much was obvious. The manager was practically drooling on her. Maybe she liked that. She should be used to it by now. Jack narrowed his eyes. If that's what she was into, so be it. She could wait forever. Jack wasn't going to fawn all over the girl. She looked overjoyed to be put on display like a piece of meat. The girls that worked there were half naked. He didn't think a girl like her should be working at a place like that. She was too good for it. Clearly, though, the manager was thrilled with her. He kept touching her arm and smiling at her, But he wasn't smiling at her. He was smiling at her boobs. Jack wanted to kill him. "If you would just try this on in the back, I can take a picture and send it to headquarters." Janet giggled and disappeared into the back with the uniform. Dev and Kaylee were sitting at the bar with their heads together. They were always like that, totally in tune. Too bad that right now it meant they were missing what was going down. Jack walked over and tapped Dev on the shoulder. "Are you sure this is a good idea?" Dev and Kaylee both snapped their heads up and stared at him. "What, man? You mean Janet?" "Yes. She shouldn't be working in a place like this." Devlin looked baffled. "Why not? The girl needs a job. Her parents are being real hard on her since she dropped out." Kaylee lifted her shoulders in a graceful shrug. "They don't need anyone at Maze right now, unfortunately. It's the mall or babysitting." Jack didn't say anything. He just walked away to stand near the door that Janet had disappeared into. He had an unsettled feeling in his gut. It took him a minute to figure out what it was. He was angry at Dev for the first time in his life. They were missing the point. This was not the place for a girl like her. She'd be on display constantly, and someone would put his meat paws on her eventually. It was only a matter of time. Janet chose that moment to walk out of the storage room in the tightest orange shorts and the smallest top Jack had ever seen. It was cropped to show her flat midriff and way too small. He stared at her, his breath coming hard and fast. The tank hugged her gorgeous tits, pushing them up and out until they practically spilled over the top. He felt the blood rushing to his groin as hot lust sliced through him. And anger. The whole place was hooting and hollering like animals at the sight of her. Janet smiled and cocked her shoulder at the crowd, preening. Didn't she realize the danger she was in? The crowd was like a pack of damn wolves, and she was the lamb. The girl was too damn gorgeous for her own good. Jack had to stop himself from throwing his jacket over her. He was frozen in place, his eyes glued to her, feeling utterly enraged. A group of college guys at a nearby table started chanting, "Fresh meat! Fresh meat! Fresh meat!" Jack felt his blood begin to boil. Devlin was beside him in an instant. Kaylee looked freaked out too. But Jack only had eyes for her. Red. He saw red. "I see what you mean, man. Come on, Janet, let's get out of here." Kaylee scooped up Janet's clothes from the storage room and grabbed Janet's arm. She had the good sense to look a little concerned when one of the guys stepped in front of her. Before Jack could move, the little turd reached out to grab her breast. Jack shoved him backwards with one hand and then elbowed his buddy in the chin when he tried to intervene. Without turning, Jack drove his heel down into the little shit's foot and heard a snap. The guy let out a blood-curdling wail. Jack ignored him and threw $20 on the countertop. For the uniform. It was over in less than a minute.
Chapter 13. Janet. Janet was shaking as they practically ran out of the mall toward the parking lot. Once they were outside, she wrapped her arms around her bare midriff. She had worn far less as a ballet dancer, but she had never felt more naked in her life. She hadn't been expecting that. They'd made her feel like a stripper. Worse, they'd made her feel like she was for sale. Like she didn't deserve respect. Thank God she hadn't been alone. Kaylee helped her pull her shirt over the trashy tank top. She was trying not to cry. It didn't work. She was fruitlessly wiping away the tears when she caught Jack staring at her. She narrowed her eyes at him, not in the mood for his disapproval. She already felt foolish. She didn't need him to rub it in. "What?" "Why do you do that?" "I don't know what you are talking about." "Yes, you do." She looked away, suddenly feeling more exposed than she had in the restaurant. The funny thing was, she did know. He wanted to know why she craved the attention. She licked her lips, unsure how to answer. "You okay, Nettie?" Kaylee was back, putting her arm around Janet's shoulders. She nodded and stood up straight. No harm done. She'd been through worse. Her whole life people had poked and prodded her, both as a dancer and at home. Nothing she ever did was good enough. Shake it off, girl. She would just have to find a job somewhere else. I'm good, thanks. Devlin looked relieved that she wasn't going to cry anymore. She almost smiled at the way he was already treating her like an older brother. It was adorable. And it was really nice to know he had her back. We better go. I need to get these two little missies home to their mamas. Kaylee giggled at Devlin as he pulled her into his arms for a kiss. Janet opened her mouth and said something that surprised even her. Jack is taking me. Kaylee's mouth dropped open for a full minute before slowly widening into a huge grin. Devlin looked thrilled. She slid her eyes sideways, peeking at the huge man standing beside her. Jack hadn't said a word, but Devin Kaylee's big smiles had clearly irritated him. Devlin slapped him on the back. Hard. All right, man. Have a good night. And then they were gone, leaving Janet standing all alone with Jack in the mall parking lot. The big man had barely said a word to her, other than to ask her why she was such an idiot. Typically, that made her like him even more. He shifted his eyes toward her and raised an eyebrow. She lifted her chin. She wasn't going to let him intimidate her. So, are we just going to stand here all night? He grunted and grabbed her arm, pulling her toward his bike.
Chapter 14. Jack. Jack stared straight ahead, trying to focus on the road. He'd never ridden with anyone on the back of his bike before. He could feel her slender arms wrapped around his waist with surprising strength. She had a good grip for such a tiny thing. That's right. Kaylee had said she'd been a dancer. It made sense with the graceful way she moved with him on the bike, unconsciously leaning into the turns with him. He'd given her his helmet and thrust her onto the seat, trying not to stare at her spread thighs beneath him. Those orange shorts clung to her body in a way that should have been illegal. He'd climbed on and started the bike without hesitation. He made sure she understood that he was annoyed with her, that this ride was a one-time thing, all without saying a word. The mall was half an hour from town, which gave him plenty of time to enjoy her body pressed against his back. And he was enjoying it. A lot. He groaned inwardly. It was his front he'd like her pressed against. He wanted her. Badly. He might as well stop lying to himself about it. The little minx was getting to him whether he liked it or not. And for some reason, she seemed to like him too. He wanted to fuck her. She liked the attention. That was all it was. But maybe it was enough. Maybe he should bet her. He'd make it clear that it was just the once, one long night for him to get out all his frustrations. Or maybe a couple of times, until he got her out of his system. That would give him time to explore her, to take her all the different ways he wanted to. Yes, that was a much better plan. He'd taste her first. Then once she was writhing in ecstasy, he'd slide into her body and wrap those long, elegant legs around his hips. Then he'd ride her as hard as he wanted to. He'd show her that he wasn't the sort of man to be trifled with. He would be rough, but not too rough. Afterwards, he'd tell her to wait quietly until he wanted her again. It probably wouldn't take too long, given the state she'd put him in these last couple of days. He'd take her from behind the next time, so he could see that sweet little ass up close. He almost lost his focus on the road at the thought. His mind wandered again. Toward the end of the night, he'd be gentle with her. Maybe he'd even let her be on top. She'd look good riding him. Then he'd drop her off at her house, and that would be it. She'd be out of his system, for good. It was an excellent idea. It was a terrible idea. He knew Dev wouldn't like it if he treated his old lady's best friend as a disposable lay. Hell, he wouldn't like it either. The girl deserved more than that. She was proud. He didn't want to humble her. That surprised him. He'd never thought about a woman's feelings before, or his own. Jack didn't allow himself to have feelings at all. Best to leave her alone. It'd be safer for everyone. She was too delicate to handle what he wanted to dish out on her, and he didn't want to make those beautiful aqua eyes fill up with tears when he was done with her. But when he parked in front of her house and stood up, his good intentions fled. She was staring up at him as she struggled to remove her helmet. He reached out and brushed her hands aside, easily opening the latch. Her hand stilled underneath his at the look on his face. He could tell she was feeling it too, whatever this crazy feeling was. Before he knew it, he'd hauled her up off the bike and into his arms. He grunted as her sweet little body pressed against the hard wall of his chest. Her breasts pressed into him as her eyes opened wide. His mouth was on hers before either of them knew what was happening. Dear God. White-hot lust pierced him as he plundered her sweet, willing mouth with his tongue. His hands were all over her, caressing, touching, feeling, until they settled on her bottom. Then everything changed. He yanked her against his erection with tremendous force. His cock was practically burning a hole in his jeans. It was so eager to get to her it felt like it would chew its way out. She made a startled little sound beneath him, and reality came crashing back in. He tore his mouth away from hers with a soft curse and climbed back onto his bike. He felt her hand on his shoulder, but shook it off. "Wait, your helmet." "Keep it." He didn't turn to look at her. He realized suddenly that he was afraid to. Afraid of what he might do. "Jack, why are you angry at me? I like you." Her soft admission sent an odd feeling to the pit of his stomach. Something twisted open inside him. He pushed it down as hard as he could. "You don't want to mess with a guy like me." "What if I do?" "Trust me, you don't." He drove away without a backward glance. He wouldn't see her again. It was too risky. If Dev asked him to escort her somewhere again, he'd explain that he didn't like the girl, that she got on his nerves with her flashy ways and girlish laughter. It was a lie, but it didn't matter. It was better that way. Safer. He drove away, satisfied that the matter was behind him. But he couldn't forget the one thing that had gotten past his defenses. She'd been kissing him back like she wanted him as badly as he wanted her.
Chapter 15. Janet. He knew where she lived. That was the first thought Janet had as she watched him ride away. He'd known without asking. He'd just driven her home as if it were perfectly normal. And then he'd kissed her. Not a normal kiss. A ferocious, soul-deep, toe-curling, hotter-than-actual Hades kiss. But what did it mean? Janet had a sinking feeling that she was in terrible trouble. Not just her life, which was a damn mess, but now she had a strong certainty that she wasn't going to forget Jack, his eyes, or his kiss anytime soon, if ever. He wanted her as much as she wanted him. She knew that now. He'd given her no doubt. She could feel it in the way he held her, touched her, kissed her with an urgency that had taken her breath away. And yet he was the one who'd pulled back when they both knew she wouldn't have stopped him from going further. She would have climbed on that bike and followed him straight to hell if he'd asked her. Maybe it was a good thing he hadn't. Maybe he was trying to protect her from him. The lifestyle, everything. He'd been noble, trying to warn her away. Well, Janet wasn't having it. Who was going to protect her from herself and her foolish wish to be near him? She stared down at the helmet in her hands. She'd loved riding with him. His confidence on the road had been incredibly attractive. Everything about him was appealing to her. Not just his strong masculine body or soulful eyes. Not just the way he smelled like leather and smoke. Not just his long hair or bad boy tattoos. Him. All of him. She walked into the house and straight into her room. She kicked off her shoes and crawled into the bed, still cradling the helmet. She was in trouble. Deep, deep trouble. But what was she going to do about it?
Chapter 16. Jack. The wrench slipped in his hand. He cursed, staring at the bike he'd been working on. It was a passion project, not for a client. Something he'd bought years ago, not knowing why. There was something about the vintage ride, the lines of it, the grace in the heavy metal. It was a smaller bike, something that a lady might ride. Not that he had a lady, or wanted one. But after years of collecting dust, he'd decided to pull it out. He needed something to do with his hands. He couldn't sleep. And he couldn't have her either. So he put his head down and worked. That was his way. Nothing like hard work to clear a man's mind. Or sex. But that was not on the menu. Not the one he wanted anyway. He groaned, pressing down on his hard-on. The one he'd had for hours. Days, really. But especially since that kiss. He knew he should just deal with it, but he didn't want to even acknowledge it. He couldn't admit to himself what had happened. What had almost happened. Because he'd been inches away from tearing her clothes off and fucking her on the back of his bike. Neighbors be damned. That was stupid. And Jack was never stupid. Except, apparently, when it came to one hot little pain-in-the-ass redhead. Why the hell had he kissed her? And how could she have felt so good in his arms? Nothing had ever felt that good, or felt that right. Not one thing in his godforsaken life. It was as if all the pieces fell into place at once, just from touching her, holding her, just from giving in. But giving in was the last thing he was ever going to do. He grabbed the wrench and started working.
Chapter 17. Janet. Janet leaned back on the blanket and thumbed through the brochure. In the back, there were a few pages that had blank spaces for her to fill out, if she had the courage to. It was all right there in the palm of her hand. So why was she so scared to start? Application for physical therapist program. She sighed. It was a 2-year program at the local branch of the state school, the same one Kaylee attended. It was perfect. And it also wasn't. The state university wasn't cheap, and she wouldn't qualify for student aid. Not with her mediocre grades and her parents' wealth. Plus, she'd only done 1.5 semesters. Hardship case? Not likely. They didn't give scholarships for ex-ballet dancers who hated homework. She was screwed. She highly doubted her parents were going to help her at this point. She wasn't sure she would take the money if they offered it. Her mother had already hinted many times that they planned to cut her off, well before she dropped out of school. They'd never been particularly affectionate, but they had been proud of her dancing career. Before the accident. Now they didn't seem to know what to do with her, or even care. Janet rolled over onto her back and stared at the fluffy white clouds overhead. She smoothed down her floral sundress to cover her knees. She wondered what Jack would say. Or rather, not say. She touched her lips softly, remembering the kiss from the night before. She sighed and closed her eyes. Daydreaming about Jack definitely wasn't going to help. She'd just have to get a job and go to school part-time. Maybe she and Kaylee could get an apartment together. She needed to get out of the house, that much was for sure.
The pages are waiting, but right now, you're invited to enjoy a calm moment of music and reflection. This audiobook is completely free for you.
And maybe Jack would be in the picture, too. The big scary biker was softer than he looked. He had a kind heart. She knew that instinctively. She also knew he wanted her, but he didn't want to want her. What am I going to do, Kaylee? Her friend sat beside her, taking notes for her history exam. She put her book down and sipped some lemonade. You'll figure it out, Nettie. I'll help you. Yeah? But what? You'll get a job and apply to the program, and then we'll see. I believe in miracles, you know. Janet rolled her eyes and turned onto her side. Right. Just like that. She snapped her fingers. Kaylee giggled and squirted lemonade at her through her straw. Hey, and I was going to ask you to move in with me. Kaylee sobered quickly and looked away. Janet's eyes widened. Something was up with Kaylee, that was for sure. What is it? You don't want to be my roommate? No, it's not that. It's just that, well, Dev asked me to move in with him. Janet squealed and threw her arms around Kaylee. Oh my God, that's amazing. I don't know, it's kind of a big step. And then my mother would be alone. Maybe I can move in with her instead. Janet flopped back onto her back and stared up at the sky. Kaylee laughed. Sometimes I think I'm too young to get serious with Dev. But other times, I love him so much, you know? I can tell. He loves you too. You are both really lucky. I wonder if I will ever be loved like that. Come on, Nettie. Don't tell me you didn't find someone at school. You're gorgeous. Ugh, stop. You are the beauty queen. I'm serious, Janet. I mean, you were always pretty, but now you look like a movie star. Janet rolled her eyes. Jack doesn't think so. Kaylee lit up and clapped her hands together. Ooh, I knew something was going on. Unfortunately, that is not the case. Do you like him? I could have sworn I saw some sparks flying. I thought I did, but he has no interest in me whatsoever. Kaylee chewed her lip. Well, I've never seen him with any of the girls who hang around. Dev said he doesn't mess around with the easy pickings. Really? Janet sat up and then slumped down just as quickly. He doesn't like me, though. I thought he did, but I was wrong. I wouldn't be too sure. Jack's the most loyal person I know. He hides his feelings, though. Still waters run deep. Janet just snorted. That was one way to put it. Kaylee nudged her in the shoulder. What happened? Tell me. Janet sighed. She might as well tell Kaylee. At least then she might feel like it really happened, instead of feeling like some sort of dream. He kissed me. Kaylee, it was amazing. So, Jack is a good kisser? Understatement. Ooh, and then he told me to forget it ever happened. To forget him. Some bullshit about him not being good enough for me. Kaylee started laughing uncontrollably. Janet stared at her, annoyed. I'm pouring my heart out, and you think that's funny? I'm sorry, it's just... Oh my gosh. The fact that he said anything to you is kind of amazing. He never talks, especially not to girls. Well, he didn't say much, just told me to stay away from him. That's interesting, because it doesn't look like he's staying away from you. What? Janet sat up hastily at the sound of bikes out front. She pulled the straps of her sundress back into place and fluffed her hair. Kaylee hadn't been kidding. Devlin and Jack had just parked their bikes out front and were walking around the side of the house toward them. It was strange seeing him in Mrs. Thomas's backyard with all her begonias in bloom. Jack was so big, so intimidating as he walked towards her. His eyes were hooded, but she knew he had seen her. She closed her eyes, willing her heart to slow down. Then she laid back down on her stomach and stared blindly at the application. She picked up a pen and started filling out the paperwork. Well, she filled her name in anyway. Hey, babe. Dev! Kaylee was on her feet and leaping into Devlin's arms in an instant. The squeals of happiness behind her made Janet cringe. She pretended to be engrossed in what she was doing. A pair of enormous boots came into view less than a foot away. Jack was standing beside her, looming over her. He wasn't ignoring her, that was for sure. That put all sorts of illicit thoughts into her head. What are you doing? She rolled over to her side so she could see him. He scowled, so she scowled. Two could play at that game. If anything, the gruff biker just frowned even more. It's an application. For what? School. What do you care? He just grunted and walked over to a lawn chair nearby. He sat down and stared at her moodily. She sighed audibly and turned back to her papers. She lifted her calves and crossed her ankles, stealing a peek to see if Jack was still staring. He was. Behind her, she knew that Kaylee and Devlin were watching the exchange. She could tell from Kaylee's muffled giggles that they were finding the whole situation vastly entertaining. Nettie, there's a party tonight at the clubhouse. Devlin said we can go. She rolled to a cross-legged position and smiled at Dev. He was nice to her, at least. I thought you didn't go to the parties, Kay. This is a cookout, so it starts early. Things start getting a little crazy after 10 or 11. Janet chewed her lip thoughtfully. I doubt my folks will let me out. It was hard enough to get them to let me out of the house in broad daylight. She sneaked a glance at Jack, who was still watching her, frowning as usual. But I'll ask. Kaylee sat back down on the blanket with her and threw her arms around her. Come on, it'll be fun. Dev says they make the best homemade barbecue sauce. I guess, if I am wanted there. She slanted a meaningful look at Jack. I'll definitely try. Kaylee's mom came out with more lemonade and a couple of beers for the guys. She seemed to like Jack almost as much as Devlin. Janet ignored them all and tried to finish filling out her application. After 20 minutes, she'd only gotten through one page. She was about to give up and leave when she glanced up and saw that Jack was staring at her again. Maybe he had been the entire time. He looked... Jesus! Damn if he didn't look like she'd hurt his feelings. That was a laugh. He was the one who had told her to stay away from him. He caught her looking at him and abruptly stood up. The next thing she heard was the sound of his bike tearing out. He'd left without a word to anyone.
Chapter 18. Jack. Where was Red? Jack was staring at the door of the clubhouse bar. He was watching to make sure Janet didn't show up and ruin his night. He was really hoping her parents had told her to stay home tonight. She'd stay away and he could avoid her, like he'd said he would. Better for everyone. Just stay away from the girl. It would be so much easier for everyone. He didn't want any complications in his life, and he didn't want her. God, he was such a liar. He'd been in a tailspin all day. First, he'd walked into Kaylee's yard to see Janet looking like a barefoot princess, with no makeup and her flaming red hair loose around her shoulders. She looked like something out of a fairy tale. Sweet and natural and so beautiful it almost hurt to look at her. So pure that it made him itch to take that innocence, take it and make her a woman. Because she might be 19, but she was definitely not a woman yet. Jesus, who knew a sundress could be so arousing? He'd finally decided he was going to have to do something about this insane attraction he was having to the girl. She'd chosen that moment to be a complete brat and ignore him. He had been ready to tell her not to stay away. They could have a thing for a little while, at least until he stopped seeing her damn face every time he closed his eyes. Now, she was the one playing hard to get, damn it. He sipped his ginger ale and stared down at it disgustedly. What he needed was a real drink. It was getting late, and Dev had already left with Kaylee. He had no other duties tonight. The girl wasn't coming. She'd said her parents had her on lockdown. There was no reason he shouldn't indulge. Maybe it would numb the raging lust and frustration rolling around in his chest. Nobody needed him for anything. It had been a long time since he indulged in more than an occasional beer, but he wanted to numb himself to these unwelcome feelings the girl was bringing out in him. To hell with it. Jack strode across the bar and put his empty glass down in front of Donnie, who was lazing around back there while the prospects did all the work as usual. Tequila. Donnie quirked his eyebrow at Jack, but didn't hesitate to pour him a shot. He held up a cold beer chaser, and Jack nodded. Donnie watched him as he downed the shot and the beer in less than a minute. Another? Jack nodded again. It was going to be a long night.
Chapter 19. Janet. This sucks. Janet stared at her open window. She'd been stuck in her bedroom all night. Her mother had been especially annoyed that she'd gone to Kaylee's house without asking, not caring that they'd been studying. She'd sent Janet to her room immediately following dinner, without her phone. She'd finished her application. She'd read a magazine. She'd even looked in the back of the supermarket's circular for jobs. She thought she might have found a few places that might be interesting and made a neatly written list of the names and numbers. But nothing could keep her mind from wandering to Jack. She wanted to be at the club tonight, to see him and be near him. She didn't care if he didn't like her. She'd make him like her if it was the last thing she did. She glanced at her clock. It was almost 11. Her parents would be in bed. Janet chewed her lip, considering her options. Kaylee might not be at the club anymore. She shrugged and pulled on a miniskirt and halter top, dabbing some lipstick on. She'd yanked on a pair of old cowboy boots and quietly slid open the window. It wasn't the first time she'd snuck out of her bedroom window, and it wouldn't be the last. 5 minutes after she'd made her decision, she was running through the cool grass across her neighbor's lawn to the street. Only 15 blocks to the club. She'd be there in no time. And then, she'd see Jack.
Chapter 20. Jack. 8 shots down. Number 9 is going to be the charm. Jack was leaning against the bar, considering the wisdom of another shot when he heard it. "Hey, Red!" His head snapped up and he saw her, looking tentatively around the bar. He cursed under his breath at the sight of her. Long, silky legs, bare shoulders and that face. Never mind the hair. She was temptation personified, and the guys were not in the habit of denying themselves. She looked nervous. She should be. A couple of guys were already trying to offer her drinks. She was doing her best to decline them, he could see, but that wouldn't last for long. Women did not come in here at this hour looking for a drink, especially not looking like her, like a rabbit to a pack of hungry wolves. She should have known better. Damn it. He strode across the bar and shouldered aside two spawns who were leaning over her. Her big aqua eyes widened as he closed his hand around her arm and pulled her with him to a spot at the bar. He lifted her up and deposited her on a stool and went back to sipping his beer. His 10th. He thought it was, anyway. Hell, he'd lost count. He slid his eyes sideways and watched as Donnie brought her a sea breeze without her asking. She sipped it daintily and tried to continue ignoring him. It was impressive, considering he was standing right next to her and staring at her. He turned his body toward her and tilted his head to the side, letting his eyes wander all over her. He wanted to look at her. He was a man, and she was a woman. Why should he hide it? She finally glanced at him and tried to smile. They both knew she was attracting unwanted attention from every corner of the bar. She was hot, and she was new. Everyone wanted a taste. You shouldn't be here.
I was looking for Kaylee. I guess she left already?
He didn't say anything, just looked her over, considering what kind of trouble he was about to get himself into. She crossed her legs nervously, revealing a long, smooth thigh. Screw it. Jack grinned suddenly. She got the look on his face and blanched. She thought he was laughing at her, but really he'd just decided to stop fighting it. He was going to have her beneath him, maybe even tonight. Those legs were going to feel good wrapped around his waist. She crossed her arms over her chest, accidentally pushing them closer together. They stared at the luscious mounds where they pressed against each other, creating a deep cleavage. Definitely tonight. He tore his eyes away from her chest and looked at her beautiful face again. She looked absolutely mortified. He could see tears welling up in her eyes.
I think I should go home.
He lifted her off the bar stool and set her on the floor, inches from his body. She looked up at him, utterly confused. He couldn't wait to take her home. He'd denied himself too long already. He took her hand and dragged her through the bar room, but not to the front. He was taking her to the back.
Chapter 21. Janet. He held out his hand for her, his eyes willing her to obey him. She was about to toss her head and ignore him, like she always did when someone told her what to do. But there was something urgent in his eyes that made her pause. She took his hand and felt a shock at the rough calluses. Then he just grabbed her, pulling her towards the back of the club. Before she knew it, she was alone with Jack in the back alley, behind the club. He leaned her body against the brick wall, manhandling her like a doll. Then he boxed her in, standing incredibly close to her. She could feel waves of heat coming off of him as she stared up at him. She was ready for him to yell at her. What she wasn't prepared for was the look of desperation in his eyes. He was always so calm. But he didn't look calm now. He looked angry. And something else. Hungry. His eyes flicked to her lips, and she felt her heart jump in her chest. Oh, so that was it. He wanted to kiss her. Again. She swallowed nervously. She had been waiting for him to kiss her again all week. Would he finally do it? Or was he going to tell her to stay away from him again? He hadn't been pleased to see her walk into the club tonight. Maybe if she apologized, he wouldn't be so angry with her. I'm sorry if I made you mad. I know now I shouldn't have come. He just looked down at her. doing nothing. His body was so close to hers. She couldn't help it. She wanted it closer. Suddenly, a smile flitted across his face. It somehow made him look more terrifying, in a serious, hot way. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was menacing, like a wolf smiling at a lamb he was about to devour. He lifted his hand to her face, cupping it gently. She gasped as his thumb brushed her lips. "No, you shouldn't have come." Then he was kissing her. There was nothing gentle about it at all. He was kissing her hard. She moaned and opened her mouth under the assault, allowing him in. His tongue swooped in and twirled around hers, taking her, claiming her. Sweet Jesus, Jack was a good kisser. He kissed her endlessly, far past the brief kiss of the other night. He'd left her wanting then, but now he was holding nothing back. Not with his mouth, anyway. His hands were balled into fists, pressed against the brick wall above her. He was restraining himself somehow. She knew it. She felt it. She arched her back, and their chests collided. They both moaned at the contact. And then everything changed. She moaned as one hand found her body, and then the other. He didn't hesitate now. One hand grabbed her hip, pulling her against his obvious arousal, the heat of it burning her through their clothes. The other hand slid up from her waist to her chest, kneading her breast firmly before sliding his thumb over her sensitive nipple. She felt the world tilting as he angled her backwards against the wall. He bent briefly to pull one of her legs up and around his waist, opening her femininity to his pleasure. He grunted and started grinding himself into her groin, fucking her through her panties and his jeans. Oh, God! She was mindless, circling her hips against him, not minding as he pulled her top to the side and lowered his mouth to her bare breast. His lips closed over her nipple and flicked his tongue against it repeatedly. Her hands tangled in his hair as she realized she was getting close. Jack was going to make her come. Standing up, in an alleyway. His hand slipped down and pulled at the edges of her panties, seeking entrance. She didn't stop him. She couldn't stop him. She whimpered her need as he slid one finger under the elastic, touching her soft lips. "Hey, Jack's having a taste of that sweet red wine." Raucous laughter filled the air as a group of drunk bikers spilled out into the alleyway. Jack cursed under his breath and yanked her against him, shielding her from their sight. She stood there, frozen as Jack turned his head and raked his gaze across the group. They left in a hurry, clearly afraid of the deadly looks Jack was throwing their way. "Sorry, man." Finally, they were gone. Jack held her for one moment longer, and then let go of her abruptly. He watched impassively as she pulled her clothes back into order. She was breathing heavily, still aroused, still wanting more. "Is there somewhere we can go?" He shook his head, as if just waking up from a stupor. "No." He grabbed her arm and propelled her through the club and into the front parking lot with everyone watching. She didn't like the way he was acting. He was treating her like a bag of trash he had to take out. She found herself fighting back tears. Again. "Mike!" A prospect ran up to them. She knew him from high school. He'd been a few years above her and Kaylee. He had a large red scar on his jaw. That's right. They called him Whiskey Beard. She felt Jack thrust her away from him toward Mike. "Drive her home. Make sure she gets inside, and make sure she stays inside." Mike nodded and walked over to his car. He'd been behind the bar all night working, so she wasn't afraid to get into the car with him. But she wanted to stay here. with Jack. "Wait, Jack, what's wrong?" She stood there, feeling like a fool. Her voice sounded weak and insecure to her, but she tried again anyway. "Did I do something wrong?" He stared at her so coldly that she dropped her hand from where it had grasped his jacket. But she didn't give up. She couldn't. "When can I see you again?" "No repeat customers." She felt her stomach drop as she watched him grab a scantily dressed girl standing nearby and throw her over his shoulder. He didn't want Janet after all. He just wanted to get laid, and not by her. She turned away and followed Mike meekly to his car, feeling sick. Once again, she'd ruined everything. She just didn't know how.
Chapter 22. Jack. Fuck. Jack thrust the blonde girl away from him as soon as he was inside the club. He stalked up to the bar and held out his hand. Without a word, Donnie handed him the rest of the bottle of tequila. He pulled on it deeply, filled with self-loathing. He'd almost taken her in a goddamn alleyway, next to the trash. He'd treated her like trash. He closed his eyes, seeing her tear-filled eyes as he thrust her toward Mike. Why should she care if a piece of garbage like him didn't want her? It didn't make a lick of sense. But she had cared. She'd cared enough to make her cry. He'd made her cry, damn it. He had a shit ton of work to do in the morning. A lucrative custom job, but he didn't care. He didn't care about anything in that moment. "Hey, I heard you hit that sweet piece of tail in the back. Let us know if you're through with her, would you? I'd sure like a taste." He looked slowly over his shoulder and saw Frankie K. The red-haired son of a bitch was waiting for him to high-five him. Jack's mind went blank. He saw everything that happened next through a haze of red. It was like he wasn't even there. In the back of his mind, he wished he wasn't. Him grabbing Frankie's hand. Him crushing his hand in his fist. Him pummeling the guy into the ground until someone pulled him off of him. Not someone. A bunch of guys. He'd find out later it had taken 5 guys to pull him back. Frankie was screaming as he held his broken hand on the ground. Donnie pulled Jack away. "You better jam, man." Jack almost laughed. As if that piece of shit crying on the floor mattered. As if anything mattered anymore. He picked up the fallen tequila bottle and stalked out of the bar, to the back stairs and up onto the roof.
Chapter 23. Janet. Janet crawled back into her window, the frame biting painfully into her stomach. She didn't care, though. She didn't care about anything. Jack didn't want her. He was probably in bed with that other girl right now, touching her, kissing her like he'd touched Janet. He was a badass who could have any girl he wanted. He'd been horny and she had been there. That was it. End of story. She was an idiot for reading anything more into it than that. As soon as her feet hit the ground, the light flicked on. Her mother sat on her bed while her father stood by the doorway. They'd been waiting for her. Oh, no. She wasn't even surprised. Nothing could surprise her at this point. Jack had picked up another girl in front of her, as if she meant nothing to him, as if she were replaceable. Obviously she was. She stared numbly at her parents as they started to yell at her. She was a disappointment. That didn't surprise her. She was to be harshly punished. Not exactly surprising either. She was going to be locked in her bedroom until further notice. That last one she managed to respond to, rolling her eyes. "What if I have to go to the bathroom, Mom?" Her eyes widened as her mother held out a bucket. "You're joking." "No, I am not. This is for your own good. You will not be coming out until we can be sure you won't humiliate us again. We know where you've been going. And with whom." Janet's jaw dropped. She almost forgot about Jack for a moment. Almost. "Bikers, Janet. Really?" Her mother's cheeks were red with fury. "You have humiliated me for the last time, young lady." So that's what she was worried about. Her good name. Give me a break. Janet's world tilted as her father shook his head sadly. They stood up and walked out of the room, shutting it behind them. She heard a deadbolt slide into place. "What if I need some water?" "There's a bottle on your desk." She turned to see a small bottle of water. How long would that last? How long did they plan to keep her in there? "What if there's a fire? Or would that solve all your problems?" All she heard was footsteps walking away from her, leaving her alone. They didn't care if something happened to her. They didn't care at all. She glanced at the window and decided to make a run for it. She could crash with Kaylee, just start over on her own. There was no time to pack. She grabbed her book bag and laptop and ran for the window. Just as she reached it, her father slammed it shut in her face, from the outside. She pressed her palms against the glass. "Don't do this, Dad. Please." He ignored her, nailing the window into the frame. Her eyes got wide as she realized what was happening. Really wide. He was shutting her in there, permanently. Janet sank onto the bed and wondered how she'd managed to ruin everything. Her parents hated her. Her career as a dancer was over. She had nothing now. No school, no freedom, no Jack. The last one burned the most. She'd felt so alive in his arms, so desired. It had felt like she was the most cherished woman on earth when he kissed her. And she'd wanted him more than she'd ever wanted any man before. Who was she kidding? She'd never kissed anyone like Jack. Not that she had much experience. She doubted she ever would again. She pressed her hand to her lips. She could still feel him touching her. She felt hot and cold all over just thinking about it. She still wanted him. If he walked into the house right now, she would beg him to take her away. To do anything he wanted to her. Everything he wanted. But he didn't want her. Jack had made sure she understood she was disposable, one of many. Kaylee had been wrong. He probably had a different girl every night. The thought burned into her, stealing away any hope. He didn't want her. She curled into a ball as racking sobs shook her body. Chapter 24. Kaylee. Kaylee stood outside Janet's front door and knocked. She hadn't heard from Nettie in 3 days, since the night of the barbecue. She'd heard something happened after she'd left, something between Janet and Jack. Deb had given her the PG version, but supposedly people had seen them together. That was good. She wanted her friends to be together. In their own ways, they were two of the loneliest people she knew. And two of the best. Both of them were amazing people, and she loved them. So yeah, them hooking up was a very good thing. This radio silence was bad. She couldn't help it. She was worried. Janet had always been a carefree girl, stubbornly ignoring the problems she faced at home. Lord knows she had enough of those. Kaylee had watched for years as her family wore her down. Her wealthy parents had put so much pressure on her to succeed as a classical dancer that it had nearly destroyed her. The accident had done more than finally end her ballet career once and for all. It had made her invisible to her parents. Since then, Janet had been in a tailspin. Kaylee sighed and rang the buzzer. She dreaded this conversation. If Janet was hiding out because of Jack, she didn't know what to tell her. He was a complicated guy. Devlin had told her that Jack had his reasons for being so solitary, but he wouldn't tell her why. Either way, she didn't want her friend to be hurt any more than she was already. Yes? Janet's dad was at the door. He looked over his shoulder nervously. Is Janet at home? I haven't heard from her in a few days. That's because she lost phone privileges. Kaylee frowned and shifted her weight on her legs. Can I see her, please? He shook his head. You shouldn't be here, Kaylee. Who's there? A shrill voice came from further inside the house. Janet's mother appeared in the doorway beside her dad. She looked crazed. Get out of here, you tramp. I know you're the one who took my daughter to that place. Kaylee stepped backwards in shock. What was wrong with them? Where was her friend? Where's Janet? I want to talk to her. You can't talk to her. Kaylee lifted her chin. Mrs. Mahoney was freaking her out, but she would not abandon her friend. Their words meant nothing compared to her love for Janet. Why not? You're a bad influence, that is why. Stay away from her. And you can tell that giant who keeps driving by to stay away. Giant? The criminal with the long hair and the devil bike. They must mean Jack. That was interesting. He'd been driving by Janet's house since when? What the heck had happened between them? Kaylee wanted to get away from these horrible people as quickly as possible, but she had to find out where her friend was. Thankfully, Janet's mom disappeared back into the house. Please, Mr. Mahoney. Where is she? He glanced over his shoulder and smiled apologetically. She's in her room, but she's not coming out anytime soon. Her room? You are locking her up like a criminal? He looked ashamed for a moment. Sorry, Kaylee. He closed the door in her face. Kaylee stood there wondering what the heck was going on. Then she squared her shoulders. She knew where Janet's room was. No one could stop her from peeking in the window. She snuck along the side of the house and stared aghast at the hastily nailed-shut window frame. They really were treating Janet like a criminal. Kaylee shuddered, sympathy twisting her guts. She might have lost her dad early on, but he'd loved and protected her. So had her mom. Growing up, she'd thought her well-off friend had the best life. The big house, 2 parents. Kaylee had figured out that it wasn't so simple a long time ago. Now she realized just how wrong she had been all those years. She knocked tentatively on the window. She tried to see inside the room, but it was hard without any lights on inside. Janet's face appeared in the window. There were circles under her pretty blue eyes. She looked awful. Janet held a finger to her lips, signaling silence. Kaylee nodded and waited while Jan disappeared from the window. She was back after a few moments, holding up a piece of paper with hastily scribbled words. 3 days. You've been in there for 3 days? Janet nodded and wrote something on the back of the page. Scared. No food or water. Kaylee covered her mouth with her hand, horrified. Janet's head disappeared from sight for a moment. She reappeared in the window with a fresh piece of paper. I need to get out of here. Kaylee nodded and mouthed, I'll be back later. Let me talk to Deb. She wasn't sure if her friend understood her. She ran across the lawn, pulling her cell phone from her pocket. Deb would help her figure out what to do. They had to help her. They had to save Janet.
Chapter 25. Jack. Misery. Pure misery. He stared at the beer in his hand. He'd been drinking it like water, trying to fight the urge to go to her. Janet had not answered his texts or come out of her house when he slowly drove down her street. He finished the beer and grabbed another. He would not ride past her house again. It was stupid. It was something a fucking teenager would do. Just leave the girl alone. But he couldn't. He felt like he was tearing up inside. The look on her face when he'd pushed her away. He'd hurt her. She'd cared enough that he had hurt her. At the same time, he hurt himself. He thought that she'd be confused, and that was all. No good girl in her right mind would want to be with him, for real. She was just sowing her wild oats, and he was trying to keep her from getting hurt, from getting dirty just by being near him. It was the hardest damn thing he'd ever done, and it had backfired. He was still tied up in knots, wanting her more than ever. And now she hated him. Thought he was only using her. Thought he wanted somebody else more. What a cruel joke. Nothing could be further from the truth. She was the only one he wanted. The only one he'd ever wanted like this. It felt like he was being twisted into two halves. The smart Jack who should be glad that she hated him, and the Jack that wanted to tear the world apart just to get to her. Didn't matter that she was too good for him. He wanted her anyway. And now it was too late. He threw his beer against the wall. It smashed, spraying his tools with foamy white beer. He stared at it, breathing hard. Then he walked to the fridge in his studio and pulled out another one. Maybe if he kept drinking, this ache inside him would fade. Just a little. Maybe it would be enough.
Chapter 26. Janet. This is a very, very bad idea. Janet closed her eyes and tensed her body, ready to leap out of the way. She was holding her desk chair in the air, barely able to keep it up with her trembling arms. She was already so weak from lack of food, but she could do this. She had to do this. Her parents had left her in there for almost 4 days now. 4 days without food or water. Janet was starting to think they weren't ever going to let her out. Tears stung her eyes. She'd always known her mother didn't really love her, but to do this to her. And her father, weak as he was, he'd cared a little bit. She'd thought he had anyway. Apparently, she'd been wrong. Just like she'd been wrong about Jack. She'd thought he cared about her, more than just wanting to take her to bed. He'd acted so protective of her when those guys had stepped to her at the mall, but he'd just been doing what he did. He was like a medieval knight in that way, a hero who always did the right thing. It didn't mean he cared. Nobody really cared about her. She swallowed back the sob that caught in her throat. No time for tears. She was on her own now, once and for all. She had to do this herself. She was strong. She survived shin splints and bloody toes on a weekly basis when she was dancing. She'd survived the loss of her chance to be a prima ballerina, the one thing she loved doing most in the world, the thing that defined her. She'd taken on one of the spawns toe-to-toe, for God's sake. She could do this. She knew Kaylee would try to help her, but she didn't know how or when. Maybe once she was on her feet, but what could Kaylee really do? No, Janet was on her own in this. Kaylee couldn't solve this disaster. She was no match for Janet's evil witch of a mother. She said a little prayer of thanks to God for giving her one true friend. Her only friend in the world. Then she swung the chair back over her head and threw it at the window.
Chapter 27. Jack. Red. He cracked his eyes open and tried to shake off the dream. She'd been there, telling him she wanted him, begging him to take her in his arms, and, well, fuck if that wasn't the worst possible time to wake up from a dream. Jack sat up. He was on the roof with the worst hangover he'd had in his life. No, wait, that was yesterday. Or the day before. Today was the worst hangover anyone had had ever in the goddamn history of mankind. He moaned and rolled over to a seated position. It was the 4th day of his bender. He picked up the empty tequila bottle and grimaced. He needed a cup of coffee. He needed a shower. He needed a shower with coffee instead of water. "Jack, man, you up there? Come down. We gotta talk to you." Dev was calling him. He stood unsteadily and headed to the roof hatch. He flung it open and took the service ladder down to the main level. When he got downstairs, a terrible feeling of foreboding came over him. He rubbed his head, wondering if it was just from the abuse he'd heaped on his liver, but he couldn't shake the feeling. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. "We're out back." Kaylee and Dev stood in the back alley. She looked distraught. Hell, even Dev looked worried about something. "Man, you look like shit." Jack ignored the comment. He just waited. But they looked at each other, neither of them speaking. Finally, he spoke. "What is it?" Kaylee stepped forward nervously as if she weren't sure she should be telling him something. He stood there silently, watching her decide what to say. She swallowed and finally opened her mouth. "It's Janet." He said nothing, fully expecting her to tear into him for what had happened in the alley, what had almost happened. He almost laughed. He should have just taken her up against the wall. Then maybe she'd be out of his system by now. That was a joke. Nothing would do that. He knew that now. God knows the booze hadn't blotted her from his mind. She was it for him, and he'd blown it. "I don't know if there's anything going on with the two of you, or if you care about her, but—" He looked at Dev over her shoulder to see if his friend was mad at him. How was he supposed to explain this fiasco to him? To anyone? He had taken the sweetest, fieriest, most beautiful girl in the world and made her hate him. And he didn't blame her one bit. "There isn't." Kaylee stared at him. "There isn't anything going on." "Okay. I just thought maybe you wanted to help her. After what happened at the mall. Even if there isn't, I know she likes you, Jack." He blinked. They weren't yelling at him. And she said Janet liked him. She did she? He felt a tiny flicker of something foreign. Hope. It was hope. So she still liked him. She must be insane. But he didn't care. He'd take her if she was still willing. No holding back this time. Where is she? He stared at Kaylee with one eyebrow raised. Even that movement was painful in his recently inebriated state. Didn't matter. He wanted to go get Janet. Now. But instead of telling him where to find her, Kaylee let out a deep breath. "I'm scared for her." What? He was prepared for her to tell him that Janet had gotten herself into trouble. Fine, he'd help her. He was prepared for her to tell him that Janet was angry at him and wouldn't come to the clubhouse. Even better, he'd beg her forgiveness. He was not prepared for what Kaylee said next. Not at all. "Her parents found out she's been hanging around the clubhouse. They what?" "They locked her in her room with no food or water. It's been 3 days, at least. Maybe 4, and—" "What?" "She hasn't had any food or water in days. I don't even know if they care if she lives or dies at this point. I was going to call the police, but Dev said—" He closed his eyes and felt the deepest rage he'd ever felt in his life. His sweet girl punished for hanging around him. He roared. There was no other word for the sound that came out of his mouth. Then he climbed onto his bike and rode.
Chapter 28. Janet. I'm here about the opening? The woman looked Janet over, an odd gleam in her eye. The place was clean enough looking, if not the swanky spa she'd been expecting, and it was the last place on her list. She needed a job, and this was her last hope. Even if giving massages was not physical therapy, it was related, right? Janet looked around while the woman fished out some paperwork. She had thought this was a beauty spa, but the only people who had walked out so far were men. Weird. Address? I'm sort of between permanent addresses. The woman smiled wider. Emergency contact? Janet's stomach twisted. If you asked her a few days ago, she would have said Kaylee, or even Jack. But it was time for Janet to stand on her own 2 feet. And Jack wasn't even a friend anymore. That ship had sailed. She was alone, and she was just going to have to get used to it. I don't have one. I see. Let me get you a glass of water while you finish filling this out. Janet sat in the uncomfortable-looking plastic chairs. She shifted in her seat. It was ironic to have uncomfortable chairs in the waiting room for a massage place. Anyone would need a rub-down after waiting in this place. She took the glass of water from the woman, taking a dainty sip. She picked up the pen and filled in her name and phone number, even though she didn't have a phone anymore. Her parents had made sure of that. She rubbed her eyes, noticing the strong disinfectant smell all of a sudden. She stared at the paper, but all the words were blurry. She took another sip of water and tried to stand. Are you all right, miss? She stumbled and sat back down again. I don't feel right. The woman smiled at her coldly. I know, dear.
Chapter 29. Jack. Jack broke about 50 laws in the 15-block ride to Janet's house. He was angrier than he'd ever been in his life, and that was saying something. They'd trapped her. They'd locked up his Jan. He was going to murder someone if they hurt one hair on her head. He was off his bike and at the front door less than 5 minutes after Kaylee had told him what was happening. He banged his fist on the front door until a man in his early 50s opened it. He looked terrified when he saw Jack looming in the doorway. Where's Janet? She's gone. A pinched-faced woman appeared behind him.
You're one of the biker scum that she's been hanging around with. Get out of here before I call the police.
A voice inside Jack screamed, I'm not scum, with tremendous force. He'd never heard that voice before. He'd never thought for a minute that he was worth anything. Until her.
You can have her. Tell that little hussy that she's no longer welcome here.
God, he wanted to wring their necks. How could they be so stupid? She was better than all of them. 1,000 times better. How could they not take care of something so beautiful and precious? How could they do anything but protect her, cherish her? She was so special, so daring, so brave, and fragile. Janet had convinced him she was tough, along with the rest of the world, but it wasn't true. She was strong in her way, that was true. She'd had to be. But there was a vulnerability about her he'd sensed and chosen to ignore. He'd known she needed a friend. He'd known it deep down. Now that he'd met her parents, he had no doubt where that vulnerability came from. They'd mistreated her, endangered her, ignored her cries for help. He felt sick to his stomach imagining her in her room, hungry and thirsty and alone. No, that was wrong. He was the one who left her alone when every fiber of his being had been telling him to take care of her, nurture her, protect her, love her. He did something he rarely did, something he rarely had to do. He made himself look deliberately intimidating, leaning forward to sneer at Mr. Mahoney. Where is she? Janet's mother stepped forward. She looked like his beautiful Janet, but distorted in a funhouse mirror. She must have been gorgeous once, before bitterness twisted her features. No wonder Janet's dad was so whipped.
She ran away. Maybe if we're lucky, she'll never come back.
He pushed her out of the way and stalked into the house. Show me her room. Her father eyed him warily and wisely decided to humor him. He led him down the hallway to a door with a massive deadbolt on the outside, and hooks just to make sure the door wouldn't open from the inside. Jack was horrified when he saw the size of that deadbolt. Janet was a girl, not a horse or a criminal. She hadn't stood a chance. He stepped inside the room and winced. It smelled horrible in here. He saw a bucket full of piss and shit in the corner. He closed his eyes. They'd left her alone with a bucket. They'd made her sit in here with her own offal. This was his fault. All his fault. He's the one they didn't want her hanging around with. He should have left her alone to begin with, or claimed her for good. He should have taken care of her. Not this bullshit waffling he'd been doing, fighting himself every step of the way. Now she was the one paying the price. It wasn't right. Get out. Her father was lifting the bucket when Jack snapped the order at him. He hesitated, then awkwardly carried the offending container out of the room. Jack blew air out through his nose and looked around the room. He could hear them arguing out there. The woman wanted to call the police, but the man was trying to convince her not to. Everything about the room reminded him of her. The room looked like a sanctuary. With parents like that, it was no wonder she'd created her own world in here. Posters of faraway places covered the walls, all interspersed with stunning photos of dancers. Slender girls with long legs and frilly costumes. They were supposed to be beautiful and strong. None of them held a candle to her. A rose-colored scarf covered her lamp, lending the room an ethereal glow. He turned and saw her bed. It was a mess, with blankets and sheets everywhere, as if she'd tossed and turned on it, all alone. Except for his helmet. He moaned out loud, realizing she'd been sleeping with it. He closed his eyes again, feeling a sharp sting of regret. He regretted everything he'd done since he met her. Except kissing her. He could never regret that. He stared at the window. She'd smashed it open after 3.5 days trapped in this airless room with no food or water, or comfort. While he'd been drinking himself into oblivion, she'd been in here, alone and afraid. Sharp pieces of glass stuck out in every direction. It was a miracle she hadn't cut herself. Maybe she had. Maybe she was bleeding to death in an alley somewhere. If she died, he'd never get to tell her he was sorry. He'd never get to tell her he cared. He had to find her. Now. But how? She could be anywhere. Kaylee was her best friend, and even she had no idea where Janet could have gone. It's not like she had anyone else to run to, except him. She had him, and she didn't even know it. If he'd played his cards differently, she would have come to him for help. Instead, she was out there, in God knows what kind of danger. He spun in a circle, scanning the room for a sign. There was nothing. If she'd taken anything with her, it couldn't have been much. Then he saw it. On the floor next to her desk was a piece of paper. He picked it up. It was a list of names and numbers. He frowned and then realized they were jobs she meant to apply to. He read it quickly and sucked in his breath. The third item on the list was a bodywork place. She'd probably thought it was a place to learn physical therapy. But she was wrong. Jack knew what it really was. It was part of an underground prostitution ring run by another club, the Vipers. They'd love a pretty little thing like Janet, lost and alone and so beautiful it made your insides ache to look at her. If they got their hands on her, they'd never let her leave. He crumbled the paper in his fist and left, fear making his heart pound furiously in his chest. He had to save her. He had to make this right.
Chapter 30. Janet. Think, Janet, think. How do you get out of this? You have to get out before they... Janet closed her eyes tightly, refusing to even think about what they wanted to do. She was curled into a ball on the floor, trying to protect her body in case they touched her again. She waited 10 minutes in that position, making sure they were gone for real. She had been here for at least 12 hours, enough time to wake up in lingerie and be held down while the owner explained the rules to her. They wanted her to whore for them, to take men, one after the other. She was close to vomiting from the thought of it. They'd left her with a bowl of something to eat and some water, and then shut off the light, leaving her in pitch darkness. She decided right off the bat that it was better to appear meek and afraid. So far it was working. They weren't being too rough, and they'd left her untied. That was a bad decision on their part. She was afraid. That part was not an act. But meek? Hardly. She used her hands to feel along the concrete floor. There was no way in hell she was going to eat the food they'd left, but she needed the water. She was parched. She could tell she was dangerously dehydrated, especially after her parents had trapped her for so long. Unfortunately, that was the least of her worries. She was an idiot. She had got herself into this mess, and now she needed to get herself out of it. It had been the third place she went to look for work. The first place that hadn't cared that she'd lost her ID and didn't have references. But the joke was on her. If only there were anything funny about it. The ad she'd found for body work had been a scam. They were running a brothel here, and from what she could tell, at least 75% of the girls were unwilling participants in the scheme. She'd met a few of them before she was tossed into this dank room all by herself. Their accents told her they were from all over the world. Their eyes told her they were beaten and broken. Like her, they were the disenfranchised. No one loved them. No one would come looking for them. But she vowed she would make sure this place got raided the second she got away. These other women weren't going to be trapped here. Not if she had anything to say about it. She closed her eyes, berating herself for the 100th time. How could she be so dumb? When she'd walked in the place, they'd taken one look at her and seen a gold mine. They drugged her. They tried to get her to put on some sleazy lingerie. She'd fought them tooth and nail when she woke, but in the end, they'd won, holding a cloth over her mouth until she stopped struggling. When she came to the second time, she was dressed in a black satin corset with lace panties, thigh-high stockings, and black heels. How anyone could walk in those heels was a mystery. She could, but only because she was a dancer. And now they'd given her a weapon. Leaving her the heels was an oversight on their part. If anyone tried to touch her, she was going to stab them with those 4-inch stilettos. She would have already, but she'd eaten a few bites of the food they'd brought the first time. It was risky, but she'd been so hungry at that point, she hadn't cared. Mistake. Big mistake. It had been drugged, sending her into a stupor yet again. She'd spent half the day in a dream state, with images from her past and present intertwining. When she woke up, her purse was gone. Not that she had anything in it. Her parents had taken her phone and her wallet. She knew she couldn't blame them for this mess, though. This was all her. Stupid and impulsive as usual. And now, look at the situation she was in. She would not give in. She would not let them force her to do one damn thing. She wiped tears off her cheeks. At least they hadn't tried to turn her out yet. Soon enough. She knew it was coming soon. She'd overheard them saying something about breaking her in before shipping her overseas. They put girls as far away from the people they knew as possible. Foreign girls came here. American girls went, well, everywhere from what she had overheard. She knew if that happened, she'd disappear forever. She'd never see Kaylee again. Or Jack. The thought sent a spiral of pain through her chest. Even if he didn't want her, she'd still like to see him now and then. Even if they didn't speak, just his presence made her feel safe. Just his existence. The world was a better place with Jack in it. She conjured up an image of him. She'd been doing this for almost a week now, ever since she'd been locked in her room and then this hole. It gave her plenty of time to think, to fantasize, mostly about Jack. She imagined what he would do if he found her in this situation. As usual, he was staring at her disapprovingly. He'd been the first one to tell her she was an idiot for getting herself in this situation. Of course, he wouldn't actually say it. He'd just project it with those steely, dark eyes of his. And then he'd smile the teeniest bit, letting her know he was glad she was okay. Janet moved back into the corner and held a shoe in each hand. She knew what Jack would expect her to do. She was going to fight.
Chapter 31. Jack. Jack didn't even bother with the first two names on the list. It was getting to be late at night already, and he knew the legitimate businesses would be closed. But not the bodywork special. Christ, if she was in there, God knew what they'd done to her. He would kill them if they hurt her. He'd kill them if they even touched her. He was pretty much ready to kill anyone who touched her. She was his. They both knew it, and he was done fighting it. Now he was just fighting to get her back, and once he did, he was keeping her. Didn't matter that she was too good for him. He would just have to learn to be good enough for her. He texted Dev on the way. He told him to bring some guys in as few words as possible. He might need the backup. He didn't care if he made it out of there alive, but if anything happened to Janet, he'd lose his mind. Maybe permanently. This was going to take some finessing. The rub and tug was run by a rival gang, nowhere as big as the SOS, but twice as mean. The Viper's disciples. He couldn't wait for the guys. If there was a chance he could stop them before they... He gritted his teeth, trying not to imagine Janet lying helpless underneath a paying customer. He pushed open the glass door and walked in.
Chapter 32. Janet. Thunk. Janet's eyes fluttered open, only to close again. Was someone here? No. She dropped her shoe. Her weapon. She struggled to wake up as the realization sunk in. They must have drugged the water, too. How could she fight them when they kept her drugged constantly? She felt as if she were moving through molasses as she reached for her stiletto heel. She nearly tipped over, but after 3 tries, she had it firmly gripped in her palm. Fight, Janet. No matter what, you fight. There was something happening outside the dark room, the 5-by-8-foot cage that had become her world. Loud voices, a gunshot, screams. Through her haze, she merely acknowledged that there was a new development. The question was, could she use it to her advantage? She forced her wayward mind to focus briefly. Maybe she could use the diversion to escape, get out, run. The darkest part of her asked where she would go. There wasn't anyone who wanted her around. Kaylee was her true friend, but she still lived at home. Janet tried to think of a place to run to. The only place she could think of was the clubhouse. That's where Jack would be. Maybe he would know a place for her to hide, if he could pull himself off of the sleazy blonde he'd been with. But he would help her anyway. He had to. He cared. At least a little bit. Didn't he? But he was with her. The faceless girl he'd wrapped his arm around. She shook her head. That bastard had literally tossed her aside without a second thought. The fury that thought engendered snapped her out of her stupor. She still felt slow. She still felt weak, but she was fighting it. And she was winning. If only so she could slap Jack's face when she saw him again.
Chapter 33. Jack. Jack stared into the terrified eyes of the woman at the front desk. She looked like an aging stripper. He didn't respond to her chirpy greeting and offer for him to peruse the menu of options. He simply said one word. Red. The woman blanched and reached for a hidden button. Jack was on her in a second, lifting her in the air by her neck. He'd never hurt a woman, but right now he wanted to tear this bitch's head off. His voice was low and vicious when he spoke. Where is the redhead? The woman's eyes darted to the hallway behind him. He lowered her and released her throat just enough to allow her to gasp in some air.
She's in the back, down the stairs and to the left,
he cursed. The basement. It sounded like a death trap. Once he got her, how the hell was he supposed to get her back out? What you need, bro? He turned to see Dev and 8 of the spawns behind him. He almost smiled at them. He was so goddamn relieved to see them. They have Janet. She's in the basement. Make sure everyone stays quiet. Dev nodded and gestured to Mike, the prospect. He stepped forward and started tying up the hostess. Jack sneered at her as he passed. What kind of woman did this to her own sex? She was a fucking cannibal. He stormed down the hallway, leaving it to Dev and the other spawns to watch his back. He didn't care one way or the other. He just had to find her. He pushed open door after door until he came to the stairwell at the end of the hallway. He interrupted several paying clients getting their rocks off. He didn't care. They should be fucking ashamed of taking advantage of these women. Janet was one of them. They might have used her like that. He couldn't hold it back any longer. He screamed, "Janet!" Everyone stopped at the guttural bellow that emanated from his gut. For a long moment, everything seemed to be frozen in time while they all waited expectantly to hear her reply. It was completely silent in the low-lit hallway, until the world exploded. Vipers seemed to be coming out of the walls. They had guns, they had knives, they had fists, but they never got a chance to use them. Jack used his fists to fight his way through 10 of them in seconds. The Viking was in full effect.
Chapter 34. Janet. Janet heard the commotion upstairs. She waited, forcing herself into a state of readiness, or almost readiness. However ready you could be when someone had slipped you a Mickey. She swayed on her haunches, clutching a shoe in each fist. She wasn't going down without a fight. Her eyes closed sleepily and she forced them open again. Footsteps. Heavy, loud, running down the stairs, toward her. She lifted her body, ready to spring. The doorknob turned without opening. Someone cursed outside the door. Then it was quiet. Get back! Was someone telling her to get back? She frowned in confusion and then decided to move back anyway. That didn't make a lot of sense to her, but she did it anyway. Bam! 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 The door burst inward with tremendous force, shattering the lock. Splintered wood flew everywhere, but Janet didn't notice. She only knew that they'd come for her. It was time to fight. She leapt onto the intruder's back and started slamming her heel into his shoulders. Except she couldn't seem to stab him with it. The heels kept sliding off the leather jacket, the motorcycle jacket. Jesus, woman! She slid off him onto rubbery legs. The world started spinning as he turned to look at her. His huge hands gripped her shoulders. Janet, baby, are you all right? It was Jack. You came for me. He nodded once, his hand sliding over her cheek. Yes, baby, I came for you. She wasn't sure if she was dreaming or not, but either way, she was extremely glad to see him. She smiled at him wobbly as she slid to the floor. Hi, Jack. He cursed and lifted her up. Are you on something, Janet? Oh, yes. Lots of things. Water. They put something in the water. She was babbling as he carried her out of the place. She saw familiar faces in the periphery. There were spawns everywhere. Devlin was here, but none of her attackers. She let her head fall back onto his shoulder. Did they hurt you? No, but if they tried, I was going to stab them with my shoe. He glanced down at her, clearly remembering that she'd attacked with the same shoe. Yeah, I noticed that. She giggled at the disgruntled expression on his face. I still want to stab them for making me wear this trashy lingerie. She closed her eyes and dozed off, but not before she caught the startled expression on his face as he finally took in what she was wearing. Jack's eyes had never looked bigger.
Chapter 35. Jack. He had her. He had his woman. Out. They were out. She was okay. Hell, she was better than okay. They must have given her some sort of happy pill. She sure did look glad to see him, though. He raised an eyebrow as he stared down at her body in that get-up. Trashy, maybe. Off the charts hot? Definitely. He realized they had an audience, and he hastily tried to cover her up with his jacket. He had to put her down to get it off, though. So far, she wasn't cooperating with his plan. Can you stand? She opened one eye and looked at him. No. She closed her eye again, snuggling into his chest. Perfect. Dev came over and slapped his shoulder. We better get out of here before the rest of the Vipers show up, man. She okay? Jack nodded and wondered how the hell he was going to get her out of here. Then, in a flash of pure brilliance, he figured it out. Dev, I need the cabin. Devlin looked surprised, but he answered without hesitation. No problem, man. It's yours. And your car. Dev cocked an eyebrow at him. Can't ride with her in this state. Dev grinned and chucked him the keys. Jack managed to catch them without dropping Janet. Actually, could you open the door for me? I kind of have my hands full. He gestured to the passed-out woman in his arms. Devlin grinned and took the keys back, opening the passenger side door. Jack carefully placed Janet in the seat and strapped her in. He turned to see 8 different spawns staring at him with identical expressions of shock. He frowned at them fiercely, and they all scattered, hopping on their bikes. But he wasn't really mad. He was elated. She was okay. They hadn't hurt her. She was safe. Devlin smiled and shook his head, climbing onto Jack's bike. Always wanted to ride this thing, man. Have fun at the cabin.
Chapter 36. Janet. Janet's eyes fluttered open. She was in an unfamiliar place, not the basement anymore. Not in her locked room, either. Where? Sunlight came streaming in through a window. She could see tall trees outside and hear the tinkling chorus of songbirds. Birds? Where the heck was she? She sat up and swung her legs over the edge of the bed. She stood up gingerly, feeling incredibly stiff. That's when the smell hit her. The delicious, wonderful, marvelous smell. Pancakes. There was a dresser with a mirror across the room. She hurried over to it and stared in shock at the wan-looking young woman staring back at her. She was wearing a large black t-shirt, and nothing else. Not large, humongous, built for a giant. It hung down to her knees. Was she dreaming when she'd imagined Jack and the Spawns? Was she still kidnapped? Or had Jack saved her? And more importantly, who had changed her out of that hooker outfit she'd been wearing? Her stomach gurgled and she tentatively peeked into the hallway. Might as well get this over with. If she'd been sold off, she'd have to confront her keeper sooner or later. If it was Jack, she had to face him too. But first she wanted to eat. She wanted to eat a horse. Well, one made out of tofu anyway. She tiptoed through the house. It looked like more of a cabin, actually, following her nose down the stairs toward the delicious smells in the kitchen. There was an old 1950s mint green table and chairs in there. A huge stack of pancakes was on a plate in the center of the table, along with a plate of bacon, a bowl of fruit, and a carton of OJ, 2 glasses and 2 plates. One of the plates had been eaten on, and there was an empty coffee cup. Oh, dear God, she smelled fresh coffee. Good coffee, too. Not of that instant little individual brew cups. She'd never smelled anything so good in her life. She caught movement out of the corner of her eye and turned abruptly. Someone was coming in from the deck, leaning on the door jamb and staring at her. Jack. Not kidnapped, then. Rescued. He didn't say anything at first. He just took a sip of his coffee. He looked like he'd just taken a shower. His button-down shirt was open in the front, and she could see... Oh, dear Lord. She could see his chest and stomach. Hard and lean, with the ridges of flesh covered in tats. She tore her eyes away from all that glorious man-flesh to see the glint of humor in his eyes. Sit. She sat. She sat down so fast that her teeth knocked together. He strolled over leisurely and picked up her plate. He piled on pancakes first, then turned to look at her. How long was I out? 15 hours, give or take. You're a vegetarian, right? She nodded mutely. Jack was... talking. She had never heard him put that many words together in one sentence before. So, no bacon. No bacon. He loaded her plate with fruit and set it down in front of her. Eat. She just stared at him. You did all this? He gave her a mildly exasperated look and poured syrup onto her steaming stack of pancakes. Eat, Janet. She did. She put the first bite of pancake into her mouth and moaned in ecstasy. She hadn't had real food in, oh God, almost a week. She shoveled in a few more bites, stealing glances at the man who sat across from her, calmly sipping his coffee. Then she noticed something. He had a dish towel thrown over his shoulder. Jack, the Viking, had a goddamn dish towel thrown over his shoulder like a regular chef. How did you learn to cook? He stood up and grabbed the empty coffee cup, walking to the counter. Coffee? Yes, please. He poured them each a cup from the ancient percolator. It smelled so good. He carried it back over to her and set it down. She grabbed it and inhaled deeply. She'd never wanted coffee so much in her life. She took a sip and moaned. She'd never tasted anything so good in her life either. She looked up at him, not sure what to say. Jack was standing there, looking at her. Really looking at her. Not scowling. Not running away. She'd never seen anything so good in her life. He looked so clean and good and strong. his long wet hair falling to his shoulders in waves, his tight jeans hugging that insanely beautiful body, his dark eyes watching her watch him. That's when it hit her. She was in love with him. Oh, dear God, she was in love with the Viking. She would have run out of the room if she'd had the strength. This was not good at all. How could she fall in love with someone who wanted nothing to do with her? She was an idiot, that's how. She felt tears sting her eyes and bent forward, focusing on her food. She ate in silence for a few minutes, wishing the floor would open a large hole and swallow her up. Foster care. She glanced up at him sharply. What? You asked how I learned to cook. When I was 6 years old, I got moved out of the orphanage into foster care. Her mouth almost dropped open. Jack was talking to her. Jack was talking about himself. Mrs. McNeely. She was my first foster mother. I never understood why they called it that, though. There was nothing nurturing about that woman. Unless she was nurturing a bottle. Her stupor vanished suddenly. She tried to imagine Jack as a boy, but it was impossible. He was so strong and tough. She started training me on the first day. There were a couple other kids there. We each had a duty. The girl who'd done the cooking had just left for another foster home, so Mrs. McNeely decided to teach me. She made you cook for her? He nodded. I cooked for all of them. Well, whatever scraps she decided to feed her wards on any given day. She might have been a mean old drunk, but she liked a clean house. Oh, God, Jack. I didn't realize you were an orphan. How long were you with her? He shrugged. A couple of years. Until the next foster house. And the next one. In retrospect, Mrs. McNeely wasn't so bad. She took a deep breath, realizing what he was saying. They'd hurt him. She wanted to kill them for that. She snuck a glance at him. He was looking out the window. She realized he was letting her in, telling her something no one knew. You got away, though. He nodded. When I was 14, I'd been tinkering with stuff for years. Garbage I'd find lying around. You have no idea how much junk poor people keep in their backyards. It's like they are afraid to throw anything away. I found an ancient broken-down Indian bike and been slowly fixing it when Norm wasn't around to stop me. He looked at her and Janet's breath caught at the raw pain in his eyes. He was a real cold bastard. He killed a kid once, in front of me, made me lie to the social worker and say it was an accident. What would he do if you didn't? He rolled his shoulder and turned slightly, letting his shirt slide off enough so she could see part of his back. She gasped. He was covered in a blanket of scars, huge welts, thick, ugly lines with a wide end that reminded her of something. She felt her insides twist into a knot. It was a belt buckle. Someone had beaten Jack with a belt buckle. As soon as that bike turned over the first time, I left, and I never looked back. I couldn't help the other kids. I couldn't do anything but run. I went back later and beat the hell out of him, but that's another story. Those kids, though, I still don't know what happened to them. She stared at the beautiful man sitting in front of her as he pulled his shirt back on. He went back to looking out the window. You helped me. He grunted and stood. We got the other girls out, too. Sent someone back, Dev knows, to shut it down for good. A Fed. Good. She nodded to herself and said it again. Good. I didn't. He looked at her and then away, clearly struggling with what he was trying to say. His eyes met hers again as he continued. Nothing happened with that girl at the club. Janet's mouth opened. "Oh." That's all he said about it. But she believed him. He ran his hands through his hair. "Are you finished eating? I want to show you something." He walked out of the kitchen door without waiting for an answer. Janet stood up and followed him onto the deck. The house sat above a small mountain lake. There weren't any other houses out here. They were completely alone. It was beautiful. She felt Jack's hands on her shoulders and stared up at him as he slowly turned her around to face him. He was staring at her lips. He was going to kiss her. He leaned down and whispered into her ear. "Are you sure you're okay?" She nodded. He put his arms around her and smiled sweetly. His smile was gorgeous. He'd only ever smirked at her before, and his face had barely moved. This was a bright, shining thing in the middle of his chiseled face. Jack wasn't just sexy and hard. He was freaking beautiful. Good. And then he chucked her into the lake.
Chapter 37. Jack. Jack watched as Janet came up sputtering. He was ready to jump in at a moment's notice if she needed help, of course, but she looked fine. Pissed off, but fine. He smiled to himself. He liked getting her riled up, and it meant that she was okay. Even if she had been scared, even if her own family had treated her like an animal, she was okay.
What the hell, Jack?
He shrugged, liking the way the wet t-shirt clung to her curves as she bobbed up and down in the water. He'd have to get her out of that soon. Very soon. Sorry, you smelled. Her mouth opened and shut like a fish. He sure did get a kick out of shocking her. He grinned and started taking his clothes off. She shut her mouth abruptly and looked at him with a very different look on her face. A very warm look. He shimmied his jeans down over his hips, kicking off his boots with them. She was trying to look anywhere but at him. He glanced down and saw his cock was already rising. He was hard, just like that, and he hadn't even touched her. He took a running leap into the water 5 feet from Janet, just close enough to splash her. He came up to catch her reaction, but she was gone. Splash! Water came flying at his head. She'd swum around him somehow and was pushing water at him with her forearms. Damn, she was really getting some good waves with that technique. He was on her in an instant, grabbing her arms and holding them in the air while they both kicked their legs to stay afloat. Don't start something you can't finish, Red. She was laughing until she finally caught the look in his eyes. He stared down at this beautiful girl and watched as her eyes changed from laughter to desire, just like his were doing. For some mysterious reason, she wanted him as badly as he wanted her. It probably wouldn't last. She was a rich girl, after all. A good girl. Well, mostly good. But he didn't care. If he could only have her for a little while, that would have to do. He would take what he could get. He knew he'd want her forever. He moaned and pulled her against him, crashing his lips into hers. He released her arms and held her head, angling it so he could kiss her deeper, harder. She made a sexy little sound of surrender as he plundered her mouth with everything he'd been holding back. Then they started sinking. She was laughing when she came up, but he didn't smile. He couldn't. All he could do was feel and want. He propelled her backward through the water until her back was against the corner of the dock. He used one hand to hold her hips against his, pulling one leg up and around his waist. Oomph. He held them up with one hand on the edge of the dock and began again. He kissed her endlessly, nibbling her lips in between long bouts of deeply tonguing her sweet mouth. He finally lifted his head and pulled at her wet t-shirt. Take this off. She shook her head. What if someone sees me? I want to see you. She ducked out from under his arms and swam toward the ladder. "Come back here. Now." He hardly recognized his own voice. He was practically growling at her. She shook her head and clambered up the ladder to the deck. He hoisted himself onto the dock and stood at the end, 10 feet away from her. Her eyes were wide as she stared between his legs at his cock. He was fully erect now and standing proud at 9 thick inches. She didn't look scared, though. She looked intrigued. He raised an eyebrow at her as she backed away from him playfully. "That's my T-shirt, and I want it back." She smiled suddenly and ran toward the house.
"Then come and get it."
Chapter 38. Janet. Janet ran up the stairs and into the bedroom she'd woken up in. She'd heard him behind her, his wet feet slapping the stairs, 2 at a time. He was right behind her. She climbed onto the bed and pulled the T-shirt off. As soon as he appeared in the doorway, she chucked it at him. It hit him in the face. She stifled a giggle. Her aim was better than she thought. He pulled it off his face and chucked it aside, staring at her naked body. Then he was on the bed. Then he was on top of her. It happened so fast that she would have missed it if she blinked. She moaned at the incredible feeling of his hot chest pressing into her breasts. He felt so strong and hard against her softness. Then he was kissing her again. So he still wanted her. Good. She wanted him too. So much it hurt. But there was more than just passion in the kiss. He was kissing her like he cared, as if it meant something. His hands found her breasts, and he lowered his head to them. "Oh, God, Red." She gasped as arousal shot straight to her center, spreading out in every direction. He readjusted himself so he could rub his shaft against her apex. She moaned as he stimulated her there with his slowly rocking hips without inserting himself inside her. Clearly he was not in a hurry. Damn him. She whimpered as he pulled her nipple into his mouth, tugging sharply. Her hips were moving of their own volition. She wanted him to hurry up. She wanted him inside her now, right now. He chuckled low in his throat and moved down her body. Her fingers were in his hair. Oh, God, he was going to. His lips pressed against her bare pussy, kissing her softly. Then he pulled back, and his tongue snaked out. Her whole body arched off the bed as he lapped up and down her center, never pressing inside. He used one hand to hold her hips immobile, and the other one moved above his mouth to find the sensitive nub. He started lightly circling his finger on her clit, and she bucked against him. "Jack!" She felt him smiling against her as he continued his slow exploration of her body. Finally, he picked up his pace as he worked her clit and slid his tongue inside her. They both moaned. Then he started to fuck her with his tongue. It was the most erotic thing she'd felt in her life. Oh, my God! She was beside herself. It was so intimate what he was doing. Never mind how he was doing it. His face was right there, pressing up against her pussy. And he was going to town. He was licking her as if he was starving. As if it was his mission in life to slowly drive her insane. It was working. She'd been shocked at first, but now she was too desperate to be embarrassed. She was close. He seemed to know it too. But he didn't let her go over the edge. He just kept her there, aching for him. She was gasping for air as he lifted his head slightly to look at her. Her eyes were half open, watching as Jack devoured her sex. He lowered his head again. This time, she felt his tongue on her clit as he slid one finger inside her. He was really enjoying this, a voice said in the back of her head. She tried to move her hips, to pull his finger deeper, make him move faster. But he just laughed again and pulled her clit into his mouth, flicking his tongue against it rapidly. "Oh!" He was murmuring something, but she couldn't understand him. He slid a second finger inside her, and she moaned. She screamed as the climax hit her. Her body shuddered violently as the biggest orgasm she'd had in her life tore through her body. He didn't stop the staccato motion of his tongue. He didn't stop sliding his fingers in and out of her. He didn't stop. Ah! She was shaking as he finally lifted his head. What he'd just done to her was like nothing she'd ever experienced in her life. She expected him to look smug, but instead he looked desperate with need. He growled as he slid his body up against her until he reached her mouth. He kissed her softly as she stared up at him. He looked like he was in pain. "Janet, I want to. Yes. Oh, God, yes." Relief flooded his features as she felt him position his shaft at her juncture. He felt hot and hard against her, like silk and steel. He braced himself above her and stared into her eyes as he pushed forward.
Chapter 39. Jack. He was in heaven. Jack grunted like an animal as her warm heat enveloped him. Just the tip, though. It was going to take him a while to get all 9 inches all the way inside, if that was even possible. He was willing to try, though. More than willing. Desperate. She was so tight and wet, and she tasted so goddamn sweet in his mouth. The taste of her had inflamed him to the point that it physically hurt to not be inside her. But he had to make sure she was ready. He had to make sure she wanted him as badly as he wanted her. We're close. Very close. He held her gorgeous hip with one hand and started to make tiny thrusts. He knew he was larger than average. Never mind that he'd never been with a woman as small as Janet. He'd only ever been with the sleazy sweetbutts who hung around the club, and not in years. None of them had ever complained about his size, but none of them were as delicate as Janet. He didn't want to hurt her accidentally. He closed his eyes, not wanting to think about that. Not wanting to think about anything but the way she felt. She was tiny, but somehow her body was allowing him in a little deeper with every stroke. He was going slowly, even though he wanted to unleash himself, to take her roughly until he poured himself into her. Maybe someday, when she was used to him, then he could really let go. She was making tiny whimpering sounds beneath him, mewling like a little kitten. Oh, God, she felt good. Nothing in his worthless life had ever made him feel 1/10 of this pleasure. Not even close. She clenched down on him as he was pulling out, and he lost control for a split second, driving in as deep as he could go. Her walls stretched taut around him. Yes, Jack, yes. He stared down at her, unsure, but it was written all over her face. She wanted what he wanted. He moaned and started pumping his hips into her. His shaft was sliding in and out of her sweet pussy with ease now. With every stroke, her walls massaged and squeezed him. It wouldn't be long now. He increased his tempo as he felt her body start to convulse beneath him. Her cries grew louder, spurring him on. He worked his cock inside her like a machine, pistoning in and out, harder and faster by the second. Suddenly he stopped and pushed himself inside her as far as he could go. His cock gave a mighty jump. He moaned as he felt his seed erupt from his head, filling her up. He thrust into her a few more times as her body pulled at him, sucking him deep again. Then he collapsed. Jesus. If he'd known it could be like that, he would have taken her the first time he wanted to. That very first night at the club, he would have done anything to be inside her. He hoped she would let him do it again, and again, and again. What he'd really like is forever. He rolled off of her and pulled her into his arms, staring at the ceiling. She snuggled against his chest in a way that suggested there was no place else she'd rather be. He allowed himself the luxury of thinking, hoping she might let him keep her. She might stay. A cool drop of water hit his chest. What the? He laid back again when he realized she was crying. She wasn't crying because of him, was she? He never wanted to make her cry again. What am I going to do, Jack? I can't go home. He squeezed her. Not crying because of him, then. Good. I know. They don't love me. They are idiots. How do you know? I met them. You did? I went looking for you when Kaylee told me. Look, Red, I wouldn't have had to meet them. I knew they were idiots the second Kaylee told me what they had done. Why? How could they do anything but cherish you? She sighed, and her tears welled up again. Don't cry for them, Red. I'm not. He raised an eyebrow at her, and she nearly burst out laughing. He was almost offended by the look of shock on her face at the discovery that he had a sense of humor after all. Instead, he decided that it was time to make love to her again, before she changed her mind and didn't want him again. But slower this time. Much slower.
Chapter 40. Janet. I want to see you dance. Jack's voice was a low rumble in his chest. It practically vibrated her whole body. Janet was cuddled up in his lap on one of the deck chairs, watching the sun go down. You do? He lifted her up and set her on her feet, facing him. And he sat back down again. Her eyes widened as he stared at her expectantly. Really, dance. She inhaled and exhaled shakily. I haven't danced in so long, Jack. So? There's no music. He just waited. She felt so awkward in front of him suddenly. What if she wasn't any good at it anymore? What if he laughed at her? She peeked at him shyly. He lifted the corner of his mouth the teeniest bit. For Jack, that was a pretty big smile. Please, Red. Okay. She took a deep breath and moved back on the deck. She'd perform the part of Giselle when she reappears as a spirit to save her lover. Of course, she couldn't do it full out without toe shoes, but she could mark it out. She'd have to be careful on the wood deck. She tuned out everything around her and heard the music in her head. She rose gracefully as the spirit of Giselle into a full arabesque, one leg pointing high in the sky behind her. Then she fell into the dance, abbreviating the turns and leaps, but doing most of the footwork. The dance was one of lost love and redemption. She felt all the emotions of the dance filling her up and spilling out as she spun in revoltade after revoltade, finally sinking to the ground as Giselle returned to her grave. Janet lifted her head to see Jack watching her with tears in his eyes. He lifted his hands and clapped, slow and hard, until she ran into his arms. He pulled her into his lap and kissed her. You are so beautiful. How could anyone be so beautiful, Red? She snuggled deeper into his chest. She hadn't danced in so long. She'd been afraid to. But here and now, it had felt right somehow. She felt wonderful. Everything in this moment was perfect. She'd never felt so safe and secure in her life. Until Jack's next words brought reality crashing back down on her. Let's go home. She nodded sadly. If that's what he wanted, she would do it. If she had to face her folks just to get her stuff, she would. Then she would find a place to crash. If that's what Jack wanted, then it was the right thing. She'd do anything for him at this point. The last thing she wanted was to leave this beautiful place. The place where she'd finally had Jack all to herself. It wasn't just that she didn't want to go home. She didn't have one.
Chapter 41. Jack. It's okay, Red. Jack pulled up to Janet's parents' house. Her bedroom window was boarded over. Good. He hoped everyone knew why. Then the neighbors would know what sick people were living there.
I don't want to go in there.
He turned to look at Janet. She looked so small all of a sudden, like a lost little girl. He tried to smile reassuringly. Sit down. I'm just going to get some clothes for you. Though you do look pretty cute in my shirts. Oh, did you think I was going to take you back here after what they did?
I don't know what to think or expect.
He leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead. You can stay with me for as long as you want.
I can?
You can stay forever, Red. When he pulled back, she was staring up at him with an odd look. He'd never seen that look in anyone's eyes before. It told him that he was the most important person in the world to her. He inhaled sharply. He felt important suddenly. He felt like he mattered. Then she blinked and it was gone. Jack got out of the car and walked up to the front door, pounding it with his fist. It was early, just after dawn. He didn't care what time in the morning it was. After a minute, Janet's father opened the door. He was bleary-eyed. Clearly, he'd just been woken up. Jack shouldered him out of the way and walked straight to Janet's bedroom. He found a duffel bag in the closet and started shoving clothes into it. He opened a drawer and grinned at all the frilly lady items inside. He emptied the entire drawer into a bag and then moved to the next drawer. Then he looked at the hanging clothes. Janet sure had a lot of fancy stuff. He was rummaging around for something else to put her clothes in when he saw her father standing hesitantly in the door.
Is she all right?
I need another bag.
I'll get one.
Is she? He nodded brusquely and the man disappeared, coming back with a garment bag and another large suitcase. He helped Jack as he packed Janet's things. In the end, Mr. Mahoney ended up carrying half of her stuff out to the car with Jack. He teared up when he saw Janet in the passenger seat.
Thank God you're all right.
Janet didn't say anything as they loaded the car. She stared straight ahead until Jack was in the driver's seat. She glanced at him for reassurance. He nodded. Janet turned to her father.
Goodbye, Dad.
That was it. She turned away from the open window and Jack pulled away from the curb. He'd never been so proud of anyone in his life.
Chapter 42. Janet. Janet stared out the window of the SUV at the huge metal sign that read, J.H. Bikes. It turned out that Jack owned his own custom bike shop. He'd said he was good at fixing things. How had she not known about that? From the looks of it, business was booming. I live on the top floor. There's a couple of empty floors up there, too. It's not much, but are you kidding? It's awesome. He looked relieved. She was coming to realize that he did care what she thought, very much so. She smiled and got out of the car. Jack! A couple of guys were in the shop working. They raised their hands in greeting, looking at Janet curiously. Jack scowled and grabbed her stuff. All of it. She looked at his hand gripping her luggage. He could carry a lot with those huge hands. That wasn't the only huge thing he had. She blushed, remembering making love with him that third and fourth time on the deck in the open air. He'd laid a blanket down on the hard wood and then he'd taken her twice. Fast the first time, and then slow the second. That was 4 times they'd done it in one night. She was a little bit sore, to tell the truth, but she didn't care. Not one bit. She followed him through a large metal door to an industrial elevator. He pulled the gate down behind them and threw the lever, watching carefully as they rose 3 stories. There were a lot of empty floors. Who owns this place? He glanced over his shoulder at her. I do. She raised her eyebrows and looked around. This elevator has a lot of possibilities. He turned sharply and threw the lever. His mouth opened as he gathered her meaning. He took a deep breath and shook his head to clear it. Was he blushing? He started the elevator again. I'm going to remember that you said that. She felt a funny little dip in her stomach at his words. They sounded like a promise. The elevator stopped at the 3rd floor and he raised the gate. Janet looked around in wonder. It was an enormous loft, the kind you see in magazines about wealthy New York artists. It was clean and Spartan with very little furniture. There were a few things here and there, a table and chairs under a long bank of windows, bookshelves. Jack read books? And there against the back wall was an enormous bed. It looked like a California king. Of course it was. A big man like him needed a big bed. It rested on some sort of platform built out of wood. We can get more stuff if you want. You can pick it out, whatever you want. She looked at him curiously. He'd set her bags down and was watching her carefully. She ran her fingers over the back of a heavy wooden chair. It's beautiful, Jack. I love the furniture. Where did you get all of this? I made it. She stared at him, momentarily dumbstruck. Then she smiled at him. He looked so serious, and she wanted to make him smile again. His smile made him light up. Is there anything you can't do? He smiled. An adorably lopsided grin that softened his face. For a split second, she saw the little boy toiling in the kitchen, unloved and uncared for. Her heart broke a little bit. And then he said something so sweet it made her heart melt. I can't dance. She laughed. She couldn't help it. Then she saw the metal staircase leading upwards. What's that? He took her hand and led her towards it. Come on. I want to show you something.
Chapter 43. Jack. Jack pushed open the door to the roof. He'd only just begun building the deck up here in his spare time, but it was going to be spectacular when he finished. He stole a look at Janet to see what she thought. It's incredible. She was smiling and spinning in a circle. You can see the mountains from here. He walked over to a tarp and lifted it to reveal his tools. It's not done yet. She was giving him an odd look suddenly. She looked suspicious. How many girls have you brought up here, Jack? None. Not ever. Listen, Red. She looked up at him. There hasn't been anyone in a long time. And before that, it was just once in a while. Really? But they must have offered... No comment. She giggled and hugged her chest with her arms. He stared at her long, beautiful legs. She was still wearing his T-shirt. He hoped she'd make a habit of wearing his shirts around the house. He took a deep breath and exhaled. Here goes nothing. Here goes everything. I want you. She tossed her head in that familiar, proud way. He grinned. You've already had me, remember? 4 times. She arched her eyebrows at him, daring him to answer that. No, Red. I mean, I want you. permanently. Her eyes opened wide.
You do?
He nodded and smiled at her uncertainly, just a little bit worried about what she might say. That was a lie. He was a lot worried. He was afraid. She cocked her hip and gave him a sassy look.
I thought you didn't do repeat customers.
I never have before. I never wanted to before. She was beside him in an instant, laughing as she planted tiny kisses all over his face. He leaned down and took her lips. 10 minutes later, he had a thought. They should finish unloading the car so he could take it back to Dev. His body molded itself to hers instinctively as she pressed herself into his with equal force. Dev was going to have to wait. Chapter 44. Devlin. Devlin sat at the bar at the clubhouse, killing time before Kaylee got off of work. He spent a lot of time waiting on his woman these days, and he didn't mind a bit. He waved as Jack walked into the room and crossed to the bar. He laid Dev's keys on the counter. Thanks. No problem, man. I was psyched to try out your sick ride. Donnie leaned on the bar and leered at them suggestively, handing Jack a ginger ale. Speaking of rides. He let the words hang suggestively, making Jack scowl furiously. Devlin couldn't help but laugh and slap Jack's back. How is Janet? Kaylee's been out of her mind with worry. Dev and Donnie stared at Jack as a slow smile lit up his face. They'd never seen him smile like that before. Hell, they'd never seen him smile, period. She's good. Good? He downed his ginger ale and nodded. Then he walked out of the clubhouse. An odd, out-of-tune sound followed him as he left. Dev glanced at Donnie, who was staring at Jack with his mouth open. Dev, please tell me I've lost my mind. Dev laughed at Donnie, who seemed to be at a loss for words for once in his life. He wished he had a camera to capture the awestruck look on Donahue's face. They were both in shock, but Dev had known his gigantic friend was hooked for a while. The big guy was doomed to the best possible way. Is Jack humming? Yeah, that was definitely a hum. Any idea what song it was? I want to remember this moment perfectly. No clue. I don't think humans can hear that low. Dev winked at Donnie and tipped back his drink. But Donnie? Sup, dude? You're next. This concludes Ride with the Devil by Joanna Blake, narrated by Troy Duran and Kendall Taylor. Copyright 2017 by Joanna Blake. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Joanna Blake, care of Hirschman Rights Management, LLC, and was produced in the year 2018 by Tantor Media, Incorporated, a division of Recorded Books which holds the copyright thereto. Please visit Tantor.com for more information on our growing library of unabridged audiobooks.